Survival of the fitness? Ah, not me, bro. Not even the fittest. It's elder abuse. Survival of the fitness. Yeah, I have not been maintaining my fitness. You win, friend. You win. Not even a contest. Don't hurt me, please. All right, let's see. A Princess of Mars. We are on chapter 13. What just happened? So our protagonist, John, he has become a chieftain times 2 amongst the society of the Green Men of Mars. And in his adventures with them, they were going about, they're going to and then from a hatchery, right, where they had just witnessed the birth of a bunch of new green aliens, or not aliens to Mars, I suppose, natives, I guess. And we learned a little bit about their culture and how the new hatchlings were basically picked up by random mothers who would then take them away, teach them how to be Martians, how they're going to fight, how they use weapons, how to speak, before they can sort of rejoin the community at large, kind of idea. This is how the women are responsible for the education of all of the others. And one of them, Sola, I think her name is Sola, also happens to be in charge of John's education, because he also needs to learn these things. But John's advantage, of course, is that he's from Earth in a low gravity environment. He's super strong and athletic, and he punches Martian chieftains to death. And by virtue of defeating them in combat, acquires their property. As limited as that is, only Martians can only have certain things that belong to themselves, even if perhaps they are in charge of a great deals of resources that their community uses. You yourself can only have so many things that quote unquote belong to you. But he's inherited some of these, including essentially the responsibility for the groups of people that the previous chieftains that he defeated were responsible for. And he's sort of set them up in a structure in one of the ancient communities of Mars, and in one of his conflicts, of course, he also kind of acquires the Red Princess that is being held captive, and kind of in a situation where he's still expected to return with the Martians to, I guess, their main headquarters, their main community, to go talk to the big boss of all of them, who's a crazy psycho, where it's expected this girl will be tortured for public amusement and probably executed. Of course, our hero can't possibly let that happen, so we are left in the lurch. What is going to happen? We don't know. We do know that foul play is afoot. We have been spied upon by one of the other female green, I was going to say goblins, Martians, that was looking after what is her name? Tharja or something, right? It was something like that. The Red Princess. And she was rather upset with the way that she was dismissed from being in charge of her. So she has discovered that John is perhaps unhappy with where he is in life and may want to move along. And the two main dudes in charge of the community that he's fallen in with have just let him know that by custom or honor, he's there, he's impressive, he is technically still a prisoner himself. They would love nothing more for him to try to escape, because that'll give them permission to kill him. So that should give you an idea or a good reminder of the type of society that our protagonist is entwined within, and where we're going to go from here, I think. Yes. I'll take a sip of water before we continue. Oh, just check something. All right, cool. We are Chapter 13, Love Making on Mars. Following the battle with the airships, the community remained within the city for several days, abandoning the homeward march until they could feel reasonably assured that the ships would not return. For to be caught on the open plains with a cavalcade of chariots and children was far from the desire of even so warlike a people as the Green Martians. During our period of inactivity, Tarkas had instructed me in many of the customs and arts of war familiar to the Tharks. I guess Tharks is what they call themselves, maybe. Including lessons in riding and guiding the great beasts which bore the warriors. These creatures, which are known as thoats, are as dangerous and vicious as their masters, whom he kills with a single punch. But aside from that, but when once subdued, are sufficiently tractable for the purposes of the Green Martians. 2 of these animals had fallen to me from the warriors whose metal I wore, and in a short time I could handle them quite as well as the native warriors. The method was not at all complicated. If the thoats did not respond with sufficient celerity to the telepathic instructions of their riders, they were dealt a terrific blow between the ears with the butt of a pistol. And if they showed fight, this treatment was continued until the brutes were either subdued or had unseated their riders. It was like a competition. In the latter case, it became a life and death struggle between the man and the beast. If the former were quick enough with his pistol, he might live to ride again, though upon some other beast. If not, his torn and mangled body was gathered up by his women and buried in accordance with a Tharkian custom. My experience with Wula determined me to attempt the experiment of kindness in my treatment of my thoats. Wula is his quote-unquote puppy dog, remember? Lizard version of a puppy dog, I guess. First, I taught them that they could not unseat me, and even rapped them sharply between the ears to impress upon them my authority and mastery. Then, by degrees, I won their confidence in much the same manner as I had adopted countless times with my many mundane mounts. I was ever a good hand with animals, and by inclination as well as because it brought more lasting and satisfactory results, I was always kind and humane in my dealings with those of the lower orders. I could take a human life, if necessary, with far less compunction than that of a poor, unreasoning, irresponsible brute. That does kind of make sense. It reminds me when we were reading All Quiet on the Western Front, when they were talking about how the horses were forced into service, dragging like artillery around, I suppose, and kind of like the horrible scene where they were injured and like weren't properly dealt with for quite a while. Properly shown mercy. Innocent creatures, right? It's horrible. In the course of a few days, my thoats were the wonder of the entire community. They would follow me like dogs, rubbing their great snouts against my body in awkward evidence of affection, and respond to my every command with an alacrity and docility which caused the Martian warriors to ascribe to me the possession of some earthly power unknown on Mars. "How have you bewitched them?" asked Tarkas one afternoon, when he had seen me run my arm far between the great jaws of one of my thoats, which had wedged a piece of stone between 2 of his teeth while feeding upon the moss-like vegetation within our courtyard. "By kindness," I replied. "You see, Tarkas, the softer sentiments have their value, even to a warrior. In the height of battle, as well as upon the march, I know that my thoats will obey my every command, and therefore my fighting efficiency is enhanced, and I am a better warrior for the reason that I am a kind master. Your other warriors would find it to the advantage of themselves as well as of the community to adopt my methods in this respect. Only a few days since you, yourself, told me that these great brutes, by the uncertainty of their tempers, often were the means of turning victory into defeat, since at a crucial moment they might elect to unseat and rend their riders. "Show me how you accomplish these results," was Tarkus's only rejoinder. And so I explained as carefully as I could the entire method of training I had adopted with my beasts, and later he had me repeat it before Lord Potamel, that's the leader of this band, and the assembled warriors. That moment marked the beginning of a new existence for the poor thoats. And before I left the community of Lord Potamel, I had the satisfaction of observing a regiment of as tractable and docile mounts as one might care to see. The effect on the precision and celerity, and I keep thinking celery, but this it's a celerity. Of the military movements was so remarkable that Lord Potamel presented me with a massive anklet of gold from his own leg as a sign of his appreciation of my service to the Horde. On the 7th day following the battle with the aircraft, we again took up the march toward Thark, all probability of another attack being deemed remote by Lord Potamel. During the days just preceding our departure, I had seen but little of Dejah Thoris, as I had been kept very busy by Tarkus with my lessons in the art of Martian warfare, as well as in the training of my thoats. Thank you for the alert, Queen. The few times I had visited her quarters, she had been absent, walking upon the streets with Sola, or investigating the buildings in the near vicinity of the plaza. I had warned them against venturing far from the plaza for fear of the great white apes whose ferocity I was only too well acquainted with. However, since Woola accompanied them on all their excursions, and as Sola was well armed, there was comparatively little cause for fear. I thought Woola hardly left John's side. He said that several times before, right? And earlier on in the story. On the evening before our departure, I saw them approaching along one of the great avenues which led into the plaza from the east. I advanced to meet them, and telling Sola that I would take the responsibility for Dejah Thoris's safekeeping, I directed her to return to her quarters on some trivial errand. I liked and trusted Sola, but for some reason I desired to be alone with Dejah Thoris, who represented to me all that I had left behind upon earth in agreeable and congenial companionship. There seemed bonds of mutual interest between us, as powerful as though we had been born under the same roof rather than upon different planets, hurtling through space some 48 million miles apart. That she shared my sentiments in this respect, I was positive, for on my approach the look of pitiful hopelessness left her sweet countenance to be replaced by a smile of joyful welcome, as she placed her little right hand upon my left shoulder in true red Martian salute. Yeah, that she's told you. Sarkoja told Sola that you had become a true Thark, she said, and that I would now see no more of you than of any of the other warriors. Bro horny? Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, that's right. Bro horny. Remember, they're all naked, right? Sarkoja is a liar of the first magnitude. Wait, no, they can't lie. Remember that part? I replied, notwithstanding the proud claim of the Tharks to absolute verity. So things like she probably just thought she was telling the truth, and then, yeah, you're also a very strange person, according, like, from their perspective. Dejah Thoris laughed. I knew that even though you became a member of the community, you would not cease to be my friend. A warrior may change his metal, but not his heart, as the saying is upon Barsoom. I think they have been trying to keep us apart, she continued. For whenever you have been off duty, one of the older women of Tarkas' retinue has always been arranged to trump up some excuse to get Soul and me out of sight. They have had me down in the pits below the buildings, helping them mix their awful radium powder and make their terrible projectiles. You know that these have to be manufactured by artificial light, as exposure to sunlight always results in an explosion. Oh, we have chemicals like that on Earth. They're not cool. You have noticed that their bullets explode when they strike an object? Well, the opaque outer coating is broken by the impact, exposing a glass cylinder, almost solid in the forward end, which is a minute particle of radium powder. The moment the sunlight, even though diffused, strikes this powder, it explodes with a violence which nothing can withstand. And if you ever witness a night battle, you will note the absence of these explosions. While the morning following, the battle will be filled at sunrise with the sharp detonations of exploding missiles fired the preceding night. As a rule, however, non-exploding projectiles are used at night. I guess you don't want to wake up to a random minefield, yeah. Well, not even a minefield, just like a random dawn of explosions. And there's a little note here. A note 1, apparently. I have used the word radium in describing this powder because in the light of recent discoveries on Earth, I believe it to be a mixture of which radium is the base. In Captain Carter's manuscript, it is mentioned always by the name used in the written language of helium and is spelled in hieroglyphics, which it would be difficult and useless to reproduce. Well, I was much interested in Deja Thoris's explanation of this wonderful adjunct to Martian warfare. I was more concerned by the immediate problem of their treatment of her. Shouldn't you have been taught this, though? I guess they don't bother teaching this to the men. Remember, the women are the responsible adults in the community. The men just fight. That they were keeping her away from me was not a matter for surprise, but that they should subject her to dangerous and arduous labor filled me with rage. Have they ever subjected you to cruelty and ignominy? Ignominy? Ignominy. Nope. I'm not getting this word right. Here we go, everybody. Down the pronunciation trail. Ignominy. Holy crap, really is. This is a great little series. I like little colorful words and everything. Ignominy. I hate this word. I hate it. This is not how I think this word should be pronounced. Anyways, cruelty and ignominy, Deja Thoris. I asked, feeling the hot blood of my fighting ancestors leap in my vein as I awaited her reply. Only in little ways, John Carter, she answered. Nothing that could harm me outside my pride. They know that I am the daughter of 10,000 Jedaks, that I trace my ancestry straight back without a break to the builder of the first great waterway, and they, who do not even know their own mothers, are jealous of me. Be jealous, they're going to torture and murder you. At heart, they hate their horrid fates, and so wreak their poor spite on me, who stand for everything they have not, and for all they most crave and never can attain. Let us pity them, my chieftain, for even though we die at their hands, we can afford them pity, since we are greater than they, and they know it. Had I known the significance of those words, my chieftain, as applied by a red Martian woman to a man, I should have had the surprise of my life, but I did not know at that time, nor for many months thereafter. Yes, I still had much to learn upon Barsoom. I presume it is a better part of wisdom that we bow to our fate with as good grace as possible, Deja Thoris. I don't know why they keep saying their full names, but I hope, nevertheless, that I may be present the next time that any Martian, green, red, pink, or violet, has the temerity to even so much as frown upon you, my princess. Hello, Cabbage. You like explosions? Yes, well, fortunately the explosions we enjoy are inside video games. Hopefully. Right, Cabbage? It's inside video games? I'll make an assumption and go with yes. Deja Thoris caught her breath at my last words and gazed upon me with dilated eyes and quickening breath. And then, with an odd little laugh which brought roguish dimples to the corners of her mouth, she shook her head and cried, "What a child! A great warrior, and yet a stumbling little child." Yes, totally. Good. Thanks for the confirmation, Couch. I knew it. I knew it. What have I done now? I asked in sore perplexity. Someday you shall know, John Carter, if we live. But I may not tell you. And I, the daughter of Mors Kajak, son of Tardos Mors, have listened without anger. She soliloquized in conclusion. Soliloquize? Oh man, I'm sure I got that word right. I have no idea what the hell it means. All right. Soliloquize, meaning or definition, I suppose. As a verb, speak one's thoughts aloud when by oneself or regardless of any hearers. Under a soliloquy, example, they are prone to soliloquize at length. Crazy. These are words that people used to use. Then she broke out again into one of her gay, happy, and laughing moods, joking with me and my prowess as a Thark warrior as contrasted with my soft heart and natural kindliness. I presume that should you accidentally wound an enemy, you would take him home and nurse him back to health, she laughed. That is precisely what we do on Earth. Lies, I answered. At least among civilized men. Yeah, nope. That is false advertising, sir. It's what we should do. This made her laugh again. She could not understand it, for with all her tenderness and womanly sweetness, she was still a Martian. And to a Martian, the only good enemy is a dead enemy. For every dead foeman means so much more to divide between those who live. It's not like that's any different on Earth. I was very curious to know what I had said or done to cause her so much perturbation a moment before, and so I continued to importune her to enlighten me. No, she exclaimed. It is enough that you have said it, and that I have listened. And when you learn, John Carter, and if I be dead, as likely I shall be ere the further moon has encircled Barsoom another 12 times, remember that I listened, and that I smiled. It was all Greek to me. But the more I begged her to explain, the more positive became her denials of my request, and so, in very hopelessness, I desisted. Day had now given way to night, and as we wandered along the great avenue, lighted by 2 moons of Barsoom, by the 2 moons of Barsoom even, and with Earth looking down upon us out of her luminous green eye, it seemed that we were alone in the universe, and I, at least, was content that it should be so. The chill of the Martian night was upon us, and removing my silks, I threw them across the shoulders of Deja Thoris. As my arm rested for an instant upon her, I felt a thrill pass through every fiber of my being, such as contact with no other mortal had ever produced. And it seemed to me that she had leaned slightly toward me, but of that I was not sure. Only I knew that as my arm rested there across her shoulders longer than the act of adjusting the silk required, she did not draw away, nor did she speak. And so, in silence, we walked the surface of a dying world, but in the breast of one of us, at least, had been born that which was ever oldest, yet ever new. I loved Deja Thoris. The touch of my arm upon her naked shoulder had spoken to me in words I would not mistake. And I knew that I loved her since the first moment that my eyes had met hers, that first time in the plaza of the dead city of Korad. Okay, given the name of that chapter, that was insanely disappointing. there was no action at all. No education, no learning, no lovemaking. Bro doesn't know that he just married her. Dope. Oh, well. We left that as a cliffhanger for a whole week. And that's what we get. We do need to read some smut, don't we, Sage? Chapter 14, A Duel to the Death. Oh, this is the third one, isn't it? My first impulse was to tell her of my love, and then I thought of the helplessness of her position wherein I alone could lighten the burdens of her captivity and protect her in my poor way against the thousands of hereditary enemies she must face upon our arrival at Thark. I could not chance causing her additional pain or sorrow by declaring a love which, in all probability, she did not return. That's like the first considerate thing I think I've really heard him consider with respect to the woman that he's gawking at the entire time he's seen her. Should I be so indiscreet? Her position would be even more unbearable than now. Okay, that's a little arrogant. And the thought that she might feel that I was taking advantage of her helplessness, which you are, to influence her decision, was the final argument which sealed my lips. So that's good. At least keep your lips shut until you're in like a position of equal power, right? That's that. Like, if you've ever wondered when it's appropriate to confess your feelings to someone, it's when kind of like that's at least one of the conditions, right? You have to be, and she has, or they have to be in a position where either one of you can walk away without consequence, right? This is especially important in things like marriages where one of the spouses, where like single income marriages where only one spouse generates an income, the other spouse is dependent upon them. That's kind of problem. It's also how things have run for a long time, which doesn't make that better, but it does mean that if there's a problem in that relationship, one person is at a severe disadvantage. And if you're in a situation like this where John Carter and Deja Thoris is, like, you can't confess to her. She cannot love you in the position that she is currently in. There's no way to know if that feeling is genuine or a survival response or instinct. You know what I mean? She can't say no. If she says no, she distances herself from John Carter, and that puts her life in even more jeopardy. She doesn't have a choice. And that means you don't have a relationship. You have an ownership. So, yeah. Impromptu, sudden, unexpected relationship advice from Sid. There you go. Why are you so quiet, Deja Thoris? I asked. Possibly you would rather return to Sola in your quarters? No, she murmured. I am happy here. I do not know why it is that I should always be happy and contented when you, John Carter, a stranger, are with me. Yet at such times it seems that I am safe, and that, with you, I shall soon return to my father's court and feel his strong arms about me and my mother's tears and kisses on my cheek. Do people kiss, then, upon Barsoom? I asked, when she had explained the word she used, in answer to my inquiry as to its meaning. Parents, brothers and sisters, yes, and, she added in a low, thoughtful tone, lovers. And you, Deja Thoris, have parents, brothers, and sisters? Yes. And a lover? She was silent, nor could I venture to repeat the question. The man of Barsoom, she finally ventured, does not ask personal questions of women except his mother and the woman he has fought for in Juan. Like, which is literally you in that case. Like, you could say that, right? Like, oh, he does say this, fuck. But I have fought, I started, and then I wished my tongue had been cut from my mouth, for she turned even as I caught myself and ceased. And drawing my silks from her shoulder, she held them out to me. And without a word, and with head held high, she moved with the carriage of the queen. She was toward the plaza and the door. Hang on, I missed a word there. She moved with the carriage of the queen. Oh no, I didn't miss a word. She was toward the plaza and the doorway of her quarters. I did not attempt to follow her, other than to see that she reached the building in safety. But, directing Wula to accompany her, I turned disconsolately and entered my own house. I sat for hours cross-legged and cross-tempered, my silks meditating upon the queer freaks chance plays upon us poor devils of mortals. So this was love. I had escaped it for all the years I had roamed the 5 continents and their encircling seas. The 5 continents. He's meditating. Yes, Valana, he's just meditating. He's just on his silks, okay? That's all he's doing. What's wrong with you? You don't need the quotes. In spite of beautiful women and urging opportunity, in spite of a half desire for love and a constant search for my ideal, it had remained for me to fall furiously and hopelessly in love with a creature from another world, of a species similar possibly, yet not identical with mine. I see. Sorry, ladies. You're too similar of a species to John to count for much in his book. I really feel bad for you. Sorry. There's an alpha Chad you missed out on. A woman who was hatched from an egg and whose span of life might cover 1,000 years, whose people had strange customs and ideas. You don't know that the red women hatch from eggs. Strange customs. A woman whose hopes, whose pleasures, whose standards of virtue and of right and wrong might vary as greatly from mine as did those of the green Martians. Yes, I was a fool, but I was in love. And though I was suffering the greatest misery I had ever known, he was edging too much, I would not have had it otherwise for all the riches of Barsoom. Such is love, and such are lovers when love is known. To me, Deja Thoris was all that was perfect, all that was virtuous and beautiful and noble and good. Like you've known her for a week, maybe? I believed that from the bottom of my heart, from the depths of my soul, that the night in Kored, as I sat cross-legged upon my silks, while the near moon of Barsoom raced through the western sky toward the horizon, and lighted upon the golden marble, the jeweled mosaics of my world-old chamber. And I believe it today as I sit at my desk in the little study overlooking the Hudson. He moved to Canada. 20 years have intervened. For 10 of them I lived and fought for Deja Thoris and her people, and for 10 I have lived upon her memory. The morning of our departure for Thark dawned clear and hot, as do all Martian mornings, except for the 6 weeks when the snow melts at the poles. I sought out Deja Thoris in the throng of departing chariots, but she turned her shoulder to me, and I could see the red blood mount to her cheek. With the foolish inconsistency of love, I held my peace when I might have pled ignorance of the nature of my offense, or at least the gravity of it, and so have effected, at worst, a half-conciliation. And there's a little picture here, and he ain't naked. He's got like a tunic or something and a stick. But it is very uncertain about the rest. Oh yeah, they're all giants compared to him. I keep forgetting that. Right? He's like half their size. Well, not her size, but like all the other doohickers, right? That's how impressive he is. Remember, some of those green Martians, they're like 15 feet tall, right? So that's like nearly 3 times the height of a human, a short human perhaps, but nevertheless. And so he punched one to death with one fist, with one punch. He's literally One Punch Man. He was the OG One Punch Man. In a very specific scenario, perhaps. Yes. Okay, moving on before we analyze that anymore. My duty dictated that I must see that she was comfortable, and so I glanced into her chariot and rearranged her silks and furs. In doing so, I noted with horror that she was heavily chained by one ankle to the side of the vehicle. "What does this mean?" I cried, turning to Zola. "Sarkoja thought it best," she answered, her face betokening her disapproval of the procedure. Examining the manacles, I saw that they fastened with a massive spring lock. "Where is the key, Zola? Let me have it." "Sarkoja wears it, John Carter," she answered. I turned without further word and sought out Tarkas, to whom I vehemently objected to the unnecessary humiliations and cruelties, as they seemed to my lover's eyes, that are being heaped upon Dejah Thoris. "John Carter," he answered, "if ever you and Dejah Thoris escape the Tharks, it will be upon this journey. We know that you will not go without her. You have shown yourself a mighty fighter, and we do not wish to manacle you. So we hold you both in the easiest way that will yet ensure security. I have spoken." I think that means he is now done speaking. I saw the strength of his reasoning at a flash. I knew that it was futile to appeal from his decision, but I asked that the key be taken from Sarkoja, and that she be directed to leave the prisoner alone in future. "This much, Tarkas, you may do for me in return for the friendship that, I must confess, I feel for you." "Friendship?" he replied. "There is no such thing, John Carter, but have your will. I shall direct that Sarkoja cease to annoy the girl, and I myself will take the custody of the key." "Unless you wish me to assume the responsibility," I said, smiling. He looked at me long and earnestly before he spoke. "Were you to give me your word that neither you nor Dejah Thoris would attempt to escape until after we have safely reached the court of Tal Hajas, you might have the key and throw the chains into the river Is." "It were better that you held the key, Tarkas," I replied. He smiled and said no more. But that night, as we were making camp, I saw him unfasten Dejah Thoris's fetters himself. With all his cruel ferocity and coldness, there was an undercurrent of something in Tarkas which he seemed ever battling to subdue. Could it be a vestige of some human instinct come back from an ancient forebear to haunt him with the horror of his people's ways? That wasn't a question, apparently. That was a statement, for the end of it was an exclamation. There you go. The Hudson is also a river in the U.S. Oh, okay. Well, maybe he decided Canada was better. Actually, we should pause here. We do have an ad break starting soon. All right, I'll just highlight that little spot. Cool. We are going to do ads. We're going to take a 3-minute break. Stand up, stretch, and then get back to things. We'll see you soon. We are back. Oh, there's a weird little countdown timer. If I mouse over the preparing ad, so there's an ad button in the quick action. So I mouse over it at this particular period in time. It shows the countdown for when the ads can be run again. So right now it can't run new ads. Not that I would want to. Yeah. All right. As I was approaching Dejah Thoris's chariot, I passed Sarkoja, and the black, venomous look she accorded me was the sweetest balm I had felt for many hours. Lord, how she hated me. It bristled from her so palpably that one might almost have cut it with a sword. A few moments later, I saw her deep in conversation with a warrior named Zad, a big, hulking, powerful brute, but one who had never made a kill among his own chieftains. And so was still an Omad, or man with one name. He could win a second name only with the metal of some chieftain. It was this custom which entitled me to the names of either of the chieftains I had killed. In fact, some of the warriors addressed me as Dotar Sojat, a combination of the surnames of the two warrior chieftains whose metal I had taken, or, in other words, whom I had slain in a fair fight. As Sarkoja talked with Zad, he cast occasional glances in my direction, while she seemed to be urging him very strongly to some action. I paid little attention to it at the time, but the next day I had good reason to recall the circumstances, and at the same time gain a slight insight into the depths of Sarkoja's hatred and the lengths to which she was capable of going to wreak her horrid vengeance on me. Deja Thors would have none of me again on this evening, and though I spoke her name, she neither replied nor conceded by so much as the flutter of an eyelid that she realized my existence. In my extremity, I did what most other lovers would have done. I sought word from her through an intimate. In this instance, it was Sola, whom I intercepted in another part of camp. "What is the matter with Deja Thors?" I blurted out at her. "Why will she not speak to me?" Sola seemed puzzled herself, as though such strange actions on the part of two humans were quite beyond her, as indeed they were, poor child. "She says you have angered her, and that is all she will say, except that she is a daughter of a Jed and the granddaughter of a Jedak, and she has been humiliated by a creature who could not polish the teeth of her grandmother's Sorak." I pondered over this report for some time, finally asking, "What might a Sorak be, Sola?" "A little animal about as big as my hand, which the red Martian woman kept to play with," explained Sola. "Not fish to polish the teeth of her grandmother's cat. I must be rank pretty low in the consideration of Deja Thors, I thought. But I could not help laughing at the strange figure of speech, so homely and in this respect so earthly. It made me homesick, for it sounded very much like not fit to polish her shoes. What cultural misunderstanding he should have gone to her that night instead of meditating? Yeah, I guess so. Probably. So that chapter should have been how not to make love on Mars. Not finished to polish her shoes, and then commenced a train of thought quite new to me. I began to wonder what my people at home were doing. I had not seen them for years. There was a family of Carters in Virginia who claimed close relationship with me. I was supposed to be a great uncle or something of the kind, equally foolish. Hang on a second. I could pass anywhere for 25 to 30 years of age, and to be a great uncle always seemed the height of incongruity, for my thoughts and feelings were those of a boy. There were two little kiddies in the Carter family whom I had loved and who had thought there was no one on earth like Uncle Jack. I could see them just as plainly as I stood there under the moonlit skies of Barsoom, and I longed for them as I had never longed for any mortals before. By nature and wanderer, I had never known the true meaning of the word home. But the great hall of the Carters had always stood for all that the word did mean to me, and now My heart turned toward it from the cold and unfriendly peoples I had been thrown amongst. For not even Deja Thoris despised me. I was a low creature, so low in fact that I was not even fit to polish the teeth of her grandmother's cat. And then my saving sense of humor came to my rescue, and laughing I turned into my silks and furs and slept upon the moon-haunted ground, the sleep of a tired and healthy fighting man. We broke camp the next day at an early hour, and marched with only a single halt until just before dark. 2 incidents broke the tediousness of the march. About noon, we espied far to our right what was evidently an incubator, and Lord Quaspatomel directed Tars Tarkas to investigate it. The latter took a dozen warriors, including myself, and we raced across the velvety carpeting of moss to the little enclosure. It was indeed an incubator, but the eggs were very small in comparison with those I had seen hatching in ours at the time of my arrival on Mars. Tars Tarkas dismounted and examined the enclosure minutely, finally announcing that it belonged to the green men of Warhoon, and that the cement was scarcely dry where it had been walled up. "They cannot be a day's march ahead of us," he exclaimed, the light of battle leaping to his fierce face. The work at the incubator was short indeed. The warriors tore open the entrance, and a couple of them, crawling in, soon demolished all the eggs with their short swords. Then, remounting, we dashed back to join the cavalcade. During the ride, I took occasion to ask Tars Tarkas if these Warhoons whose eggs we had destroyed were a smaller people than his Tharks. "I noticed that their eggs were so much smaller than those I saw hatching in your incubator," I added. He explained that the eggs had just been placed there, but, like all green Martian eggs, they would grow during the 5-year period of incubation until they obtained the size of those I had seen hatching on the day of my arrival on Barsoom. I'm pretty sure that's not how eggs work, but fine. This was indeed an interesting piece of information, for it had always seemed remarkable to me that the green Martian women, large as they were, could bring forth such enormous eggs as I had seen the 4-foot infants emerging from. As a matter of fact, the new-laid egg is but little larger than an ordinary goose egg, and as it does not commence to grow until subjected to the light of the sun, the chieftains have little difficulty in transporting several hundreds of them at one time from the storage vaults to the incubators. Shortly after the incident of the Warhoon eggs, we halted to rest the animals, and it was during this halt that the second of the day's interesting episodes occurred. I was engaged in changing my riding clothes from one of my thoats to the other, for I divided the day's work between them, when Zad approached me, and without a word struck my animal a terrific blow with his longsword. I did not need a manual of green Martian etiquette to know what reply to make, for, in fact, I was so wild with anger that I could scarcely refrain from drawing my pistol and shooting him down for the brute he was. But he stood waiting with drawn longsword, and my only choice was to draw my own and meet him in a fair fight with his choice of weapons, or a lesser one. Right, that's the rules. Apparently you can attack someone with any weapon, and the response can only be with a weapon of equal or lesser caliber, I suppose. Kind of wild. This latter alternative is always permissible. Therefore, I could have used my short sword, my dagger, my hatchet, or my fists had I wished, and been entirely within my rights. But I could not use firearms, or a spear while he held only his longsword. Yeah, fist him, exactly. Fist him to death. I chose the same weapon he had drawn because I knew he prided himself upon his ability with it, and I wished, if I worsted him at all, to do it with his own weapon. Reminds me of Bjorn. Or no, Beowulf, Beowulf, yes. The fight that followed was a long one and delayed the resumption of the march for an hour. Holy cow, that's exhausting. The entire community surrounded us, leaving a clear space about 100 feet in diameter for our battle. Zad first attempted to rush me down as a bull might a wolf, but I was much too quick for him, and each time I sidestepped his rushes he would go lunging past me, only to receive a nick from my sword upon his arm or back. He was soon streaming blood from a half-dozen minor wounds, but I could not obtain an opening to deliver an effective thrust. Then he changed his tactics, and fighting warily and with extreme dexterity, he tried to do by science what he was unable to do by brute strength. I must admit that he was a magnificent swordsman, and had it not been for my greater endurance and the remarkable agility the lesser gravitation of Mars lent me, I might not have been able to put up the credible fight I did against him. We circled for some time without doing much damage on either side, the long, straight, needle-like swords flashing in the sunlight and ringing out upon the stillness as they crashed together with each effective parry. Finally, Zad, realizing he was tiring more than I, evidently decided to close in and end the battle in a final blaze of glory for himself. Just as he rushed me, a blinding flash of light struck full in my eyes, so that I could not see his approach, and could only leap blindly to one side in an effort to escape the mighty blade that it seemed I could already feel on my vitals. I was only partially successful, as a sharp pain in my left shoulder attested, but in the sweep of my glance as I sought to again locate my adversary, a sight met my astonished gaze which paid me well for the wound the temporary blindness had caused me. There, upon Deja Thoris's chariot, stood 3 figures, for the purpose evidently of witnessing the encounter above the heads of the intervening Tharks. There were Deja Thoris, Sola, and Sarkoja, and as my fleeting glance swept over them, a little tableau was presented, which will stand graven in my memory to the day of my death. As I looked, Deja Thoris turned upon Sarkoja with the fury of a young tigress and struck something from her upraised hand, something which flashed in the sunlight as it spun to the ground. Then I knew what had blinded me at that crucial moment of the fight, and how Sarkoja had found a way to kill me without herself delivering the final thrust. Another thing I saw, too, which almost lost my life for me then and there. It took my mind for the fraction of an instant entirely from my antagonist, for as Deja Thoris struck the tiny mirror from her hand, Sarkoja, her face livid with hatred and baffled rage, whipped out her dagger and aimed a terrific blow at Deja Thoris. And then Sola, our dear and faithful Sola, sprang between them. The last I saw was the great knife descending upon her shielding breast. My enemy had recovered from his thrust and was making it extremely interesting for me, so I reluctantly gave my attention to the work in hand, but my mind was not upon the battle. We rushed each other furiously time after time, till suddenly, feeling the sharp point of his sword at my breast in a thrust, I could neither parry nor escape. I threw myself upon him with outstretched sword and with all the weight of my body, determined that I would not die alone if I could prevent it. I felt the steel tear into my chest. All went black before me. My head whirled in dizziness, and I felt my knees giving beneath me. Chapter 15. Sola tells me her story. So I guess both of them survived. When consciousness returned, and as soon as I learned, I was down but a moment, I sprang quickly to my feet, searching for my sword, and there I found it, buried to the hilt in the green breast of Zad, who lay stone dead upon the ochre moss of the ancient sea bottom. As I regained my full senses, I found his weapon piercing my left breast, though only the flesh and muscles which covered my ribs, entering near the center of my chest and coming out below the shoulder. As I had lunged, I had turned so that his sword merely passed beneath the muscles, inflicting a painful but not a dangerous wound. He missed all the vital points. Leon would be proud. Removing the blade from my body, I also regained my own, and turning my back upon his ugly carcass, I moved, sick, sore, and disgusted, toward the chariots which bore my retinue and my belongings. A murmur of Martian applause greeted me, but I cared not for it. Bleeding and weak, I reached my women, who, accustomed to such happenings, dressed my wounds, applying the wonderful healing and remedial agents which make only the most instantaneous of death blows fatal. Give a Martian woman a chance, and death must take a back seat. They soon had me patched up so that, except for weakness from loss of blood and a little soreness around the wound, I suffered no great distress from this thrust, which, under earthly treatment, undoubtedly would have put me flat on my back for days. As soon as they were through with me, I hastened to the chariot of Dejah Thoris, where I found my poor Sola with her chest swathed in bandages, but apparently little the worse for her encounter with Sarkoja, whose dagger, it seemed, had struck the edge of one of Sola's metal breast ornaments and, thus deflected, had inflicted but a slight flesh wound. As I approached, I found Dejah Thoris lying prone upon her silks and furs, her lithe form racked with sobs. She did not notice my presence, nor did she hear me speaking with Sola, who was standing a short distance from the vehicle. "Is she injured?" I asked Sola, indicating Dejah Thoris by an inclination of my head. "No," she answered. "She thinks that you are dead." "And that her grandmother's cat may now have no one to polish its teeth?" I queried, smiling. "I think you wrong her, John Carter," said Sola. "I do not understand either her ways or yours, but I am sure the granddaughter of 10,000 Jedaks would never grieve like this over any who held but the highest claim upon her affections. They are a proud race, but they are just as all Barsoomians. And you must have hurt or wronged her grievously, that she will not admit your existence living, though she mourns you dead. Tears are a strange sight upon Barsoom," she continued, "and so it is difficult for me to interpret them. I have seen but two people weep in all my life, other than Dejah Thoris. One wept from sorrow, the other from baffled rage. The first was my mother, years ago, before they killed her. The other was Sarkoja, when they dragged her from me only today." "Your mother?" I exclaimed. "But Sola, you could not have known your mother, child." "But I did, and my father also," she added. "For you would like to hear the strange and unbarsoomian story, come to the chariot tonight, John Carter, and I will tell you that of which I have never spoken in all my life before. And now, the signal has been given to resume the march. You must go." "I will come tonight, Sola," I promised. "Be sure to tell Dejah Thoris I am alive and well. I shall not force myself upon her. And be sure that you do not let her know I saw her tears. If she would speak with me, I but await her command." Sola mounted the chariot, which was swinging into its place in line, and I hastened to my waiting thoat, and galloped to my station beside Tars Tarkas at the rear of the column. We made a most imposing and awe-inspiring spectacle as we strung out across the yellow landscape. The 250 ornate and brightly colored chariots, preceded by an advance guard of some 200 mounted warriors and chieftains, riding 5 abreast and 100 yards apart. And followed by a like number in the same formation, with a score or more of flankers on either side. The 50 extra mastodons, or heavy draught animals known as zitidars, and the 500 or 600 extra thoats of the warriors running loose within the hollow square formed by the surrounding warriors. The gleaming metal and jewels of the gorgeous ornaments of the men and women, duplicated in the trappings of the zitidars and thoats, and interspersed with the flashing colors of magnificent silks and furs and feathers, lent a barbaric splendor to the caravan, which would have turned an East Indian potentate green with envy. The enormous, broad tires of the chariots and the padded feet of the animals brought forth no sound from the moss-covered sea bottom, and so we moved in utter silence, like some huge phantasmagoria. Is that a real word? I mean, it's got to be a real word, right? I love these words. Definition and meaning. An exhibition of optical effects and illusions, constantly shifting complex succession of things seen or imagined. That word is insane. Phantasmagoria. Crazy. It is, and I said it right. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that one feels like it's a fairly simple way to parse for a pronunciation. Like some huge phantasmagoria. No, I've never heard of that before. Nope. It sounds like a hippie word if ever I've heard one. For sure. But, yeah. Never in my 48 years have I come across this word that I recall anyhow. Right. Like some huge, I'm just saying this over and over now, huge phantasmagoria. Except when the stillness was broken by the guttural growling of a goaded zitadar or the squealing of fighting thoats. The green Martians converse but little, and then usually in monosyllables, low and like the faint rumbling of distant thunder. We traversed a trackless waste of moss which, bending to the pressure of broad tire or padded foot, rose up again behind us, leaving no sign that we had passed. We might indeed have been the wraiths of the departed dead upon the dead sea of that dying planet for all the sound or sign we made in passing. It was the first march of a large body of men and animals I had ever witnessed, which raised no dust and left no spore. For there is no dust upon Mars, except in the cultivated districts during the winter months, and even then the absence of high winds renders it almost unnoticeable. Can you tell they had no idea what Mars was made of back then? Like what was on Mars, or even thought about it? Like, Mars is famous for massive dust storms like nothing we've ever seen. Well, in reality. We camped that night at the foot of the hills we had been approaching for 2 days, which marked the southern boundary of this particular sea. Our animals had been 2 days without drink, nor had they water for nearly 2 months, not since shortly after leaving Thark. But, as Tarkas explained to me, they require but little and can live almost indefinitely upon the moss which covers Barsoom, and which, he told me, holds in its tiny stems sufficient moisture to meet the limited demands of the animals. After partaking of my evening meal of cheese-like food and vegetable milk, I sought out Sola, whom I found working by the light of a torch upon some of Tarkas's trappings. She looked up at my approach, her face lighting with pleasure and with welcome. "I am glad you came," she said. "Deja Thor sleeps, and I am lonely. Mine own people do not care for me, John Carter. I am too unlike them. It is a sad fate, since I must live my life amongst them, and I often wish that I were a true green Martian woman, without love and without hope, but I have known love, and so I am lost. I promised to tell you my story, or rather the story of my parents. From what I have learned of you and the ways of your people, I am sure that the tale will not seem strange to you. But among the green Martians, it has no parallel within the memory of the oldest living Thark, nor do our legends hold many similar tales. My mother was rather small, in fact, too small to be allowed the responsibilities of maternity, as our chieftains bred principally for size. She was also less cold and cruel than most Martian women, and caring little for their society, she often roamed the deserted avenues of Thark alone, or went and sat among the wild flowers that deck the nearby hills, thinking thoughts and wishing wishes which I believe I alone among the Tharkian women today may understand. For I am not the child of my mother. For am I not the child of my mother? And there, among the hills, she met a young warrior, whose duty it was to guard the feeding Zitidars and thoats and see that they roamed not beyond the hills. It was a shepherd. They spoke at first only of such things as interest a community of Tharks, but gradually, as they came to meet more often and, as was now quite evident to both, no longer by chance they talked about themselves, their likes, their ambitions, and their hopes. She trusted him, and told him of the awful repugnance she felt for the cruelties of their kind, for the hideous, loveless lives they must ever lead, and then she waited for the storm of denunciation to break from his cold, hard lips. But instead, he took her in his arms and kissed her. They kept their love a secret for 6 long years. She, my mother, was of the retinue of the great Talhajas, while her lover was a simple warrior, wearing only his own metal. Had their defection from the traditions of the Tharks been discovered, both would have paid the penalty in the great arena before Talhajas and the assembled hordes. The egg from which I came was hidden beneath a great glass vessel upon the highest and most inaccessible of the partially ruined towers of ancient Thark. Once each year my mother visited it. For 5 long years it lay there in the process of incubation. She dared not come oftener, for in the mighty guilt of her conscience she feared that her every move was watched. During this period, my father gained great distinction as a warrior and had taken the metal from several chieftains. His love for my mother had never diminished, and his own ambition in life was to reach a point where he might wrest the metal from Talhajas himself, and thus, as ruler of the Tharks, be free to claim her as his own, as well as his, by the might of his power, protect the child which otherwise would be quickly dispatched should the truth become known. It was a wild dream. That of the rest. Hang on. No, that's right. It was a wild dream. That of wresting the metal from Talhajas in 5 short years. But his advance was rapid, and he soon stood high in the councils of Thark. But one day, the chance was lost forever, insofar as it could come in time to save his loved ones, for he was ordered away upon a long expedition to the ice-clad south, to make war upon the natives there and despoil them of their furs, for such is the manner of the green Brasumium. He does not labor for what he can wrest in battle from others. He was gone for 4 years, and when he returned, all had been over for 3. For about a year after his departure, and shortly before the time for the return of an expedition which had gone forth to fetch the fruits of a community incubator, the egg had hatched. Thereafter my mother continued to keep me in the old tower, visiting me nightly and lavishing upon me the love the community life would have robbed us both of. She hoped, upon the return of the expedition from the incubator, to mix me with the other young assigned to the quarters of the Talhajas, and thus escape the fate which would surely follow discovery of her sin against the ancient traditions of the green men. She taught me rapidly the language and customs of my kind, and one night she told me the story I have told you up to this point, impressing upon me the necessity for absolute secrecy and the great caution I must exercise after she had placed me with the other young Tharks, to permit no one to guess that I was further advanced in education than they, nor by any sign to divulge in the presence of others my affection for her, or my knowledge of my parentage. And then, Drawing me close to her, she whispered in my ear the name of my father. And then a light flashed out upon the darkness of the tower chamber. And there stood Sarkoja, her gleaming, baleful eyes fixed in a frenzy of loathing and contempt upon my mother. The torrent of hatred and abuse she poured out upon her turned my young heart cold in terror. That she had heard the entire story was apparent, and that she had suspected something wrong from my mother's long nightly absences from her quarters accounted for her presence there on that fateful night. One thing she had not heard, nor did she know, the whispered name of my father. This was apparent from her repeated demands upon my mother to disclose the name of her partner in sin, but no amount of abuse or threats could wring this from her, and to save me from needless torture, she lied. For she told Sarkoja that she alone knew, nor would she ever tell her child. Sleepy time. With final imprecations, Sarkoja hastened away to tell Talhajas to report her discovery. And while she was gone, my mother, wrapping me in the silks and furs of her night coverings so that I was scarcely noticeable, descended to the streets and ran wildly away toward the outskirts of the city, in the direction which led to the far south, out toward the man whose protection she might not claim, but on whose face she wished to look once more before she died. As we neared the city's southern extremity, a sound came to us from across the mossy flat, from the direction of the only pass through the hills which led to the gates. The pass by which caravans from neither north or south or east or west would enter the city. The sounds we heard were the squealing of thoats and the grumbling of zitidars, with the occasional clank of arms which announced the approach of a body of warriors. The thought uppermost in her mind was that it was my father returned from his expedition, but the cunning of the Thark held her from headlong and precipitate flight to greet him. Retreating into the shadows of a doorway, she awaited the coming of the cavalcade which shortly entered the avenue, breaking its formation and thronging through the thoroughfare from wall to wall. As the head of the procession passed us, the lesser moon swung clear of the overhanging roofs and lit up the scene with all the brilliancy of her wondrous light. My mother shrank further back into the friendly shadows, and from her hiding place saw that the expedition was not that of my father, but the returning caravan bearing the young Tharks. Instantly her plan was formed, and as a great chariot swung close to our hiding place, she slipped stealthily in among the trailing tailboard, crouching low in the shadow of the high side, straining me to her bosom in a frenzy of love. She knew what I did not, that never again after that night would she hold me to her breast, nor was it likely we would ever look upon each other's face again. In the confusion of the plaza, she mixed me with the other children, whose guardians during the journey were now free to relinquish their responsibility. We were herded together into a great room, fed by women who had not accompanied the expedition, and the next day we were parceled out among the retinues of the chieftains. I never saw my mother after that night. She was imprisoned by Talhajas, and every effort, including the most horrible and shameful torture, was brought to bear upon her to wring from her lips the name of my father. But she remained steadfast and loyal, dying at last amidst the laughter of Talhajas and his chieftains during some awful torture she was undergoing. I learned afterwards that she told them that she had killed me to save me from a like fate at their hands, and that she had thrown my body to the white apes. Sarkoja alone disbelieved her, and I feel to this day that she suspects my true origin, but does not dare expose me, at the present, at all events, because she also guesses, I am sure, the identity of my father. And I bet you it's Tarkas. I have no idea, of course. Oh, Queen, thank you for the 15-stream streak. Streak responsibly. When he returned from his expedition and learned the story of my mother's fate, I was present as Talhajas told him. But never by the quiver of a muscle did he betray the slightest emotion. Only he did not laugh as Talhajas gleefully described her death struggles. From that moment on, he was the cruelest of the cruel, and I am awaiting the day when he shall win the goal of his ambition, and feel the carcass of Talhajas beneath his foot. For I am as sure that he but waits the opportunity to wreak a terrible vengeance, and that his great love is as strong in his breast as when it first transfigured him nearly 40 years ago. As I am that we sit here upon the edge of a world-old ocean while sensible people sleep, John Carter. There's a lot in that sentence. I think I may have gotten the pauses a little wrong there. Yep, I bet you Tarkus is dead. And your father, Sola, is he with us now? I asked. Yes, she replied, but he does not know me for what I am, nor does he know who betrayed my mother to Talhajas. I alone know my father's name, and only I, and Talhajas and Sarkoja know that it was she who carried the tale that brought death and torture upon her he loved. We sat silent for a few moments. She wrapped in the gloomy thoughts of her terrible past, and I in pity for the poor creatures whom the heartless, senseless customs of their race had doomed to loveless lives of cruelty and of hate. Presently she spoke. John Carter, if ever a real man walked the cold, dead bosom of Barsoom, you are one. I know that I can trust you, and because the knowledge may someday help you or him or Deja Thoris or myself, I am going to tell you the name of my father, nor place any restrictions or conditions upon your tongue. Wow. That sounds like someone giving up, passing on the burden, or sharing it, I guess. When the time comes, speak the truth if it seems best to you. I trust you because I know that you are not cursed with the terrible trait of absolute and unswerving truthfulness, that you could lie like one of your own Virginia gentlemen if a lie would save others from sorrow or suffering. My father's name is Tars Tarkas. Aha, I told you. I imagine many people in this community, listening to this story now, probably also guessed the same. Especially if you've already read the book, but that's kind of cheating. I haven't, so I got a fair guess. Chapter 16. We plan escape. The remainder of our journey to Thark was uneventful. We were 20 days upon the road, crossing 2 sea bottoms and passing through or around a number of ruined cities, mostly smaller than Korad. Twice we crossed the famous Martian waterways or canals, so called by our earthly astronomers. When we approached these points, a warrior would be sent far ahead with a powerful field glass, and if no great body of red Martian troops was in sight, we would advance as close as possible without chance of being seen and then camp until dark. When we would slowly approach the cultivated track and, locating one of the numerous broad highways which crossed these areas at regular intervals, creep silently and stealthily across to the arid lands upon the other side. It required 5 hours to make one of these crossings without a single halt, and the other consumed the entire night, so that we were just leaving the confines of the high-walled fields when the sun broke out upon us. Crossing in the darkness as we did, I was unable to see but little, except as the nearer moon in her wild and ceaseless hurtling through the Barsoomian heavens lit up little patches of the landscape from time to time, disclosing walled fields and low, rambling buildings presenting much of the appearance of earthly farms. There were many trees methodically arranged, and some of them were of enormous height. There were animals in some of the enclosures, and they announced their presence by terrified squealings and snortings as they scented our queer, wild beasts and wilder human beings. Only once did I perceive a human being, and that was at the intersection of our crossroads, with the wild, white turnpike which cuts each cultivated district longitudinally at its exact center. The fellow must have been sleeping beside the road, for as I came abreast of him, he raised up on one elbow and, after a single glance at the approaching caravan, leaped shrieking to his feet and fled madly down the road, scaling a nearby wall with the agility of a scared cat. The Tharks paid him not the slightest attention. They were not out upon the warpath, and the only sign that I had that they had seen him was a quickening of the pace of the caravan as we hastened toward the bordering desert, which marked our entrance into the realm of Tal Hajas. Or Tal Hajas, perhaps. Maybe there's an emphasis on the J. Not once did I have speech with Dejah Thoris, as she sent no word to me that I would be welcome at her chariot. My foolish pride kept me from making any advances. I verily believe that a man's way with woman is an inverse ratio to his prowess among men. The weakling and the saphead have often great ability to charm the fair sex, while the fighting man, who can face 1,000 real dangers unafraid, sits hiding in the shadows like some frightened child. Call that coping. That's a cope, bro. You are coping hard. Just 30 days after my advent upon Barsoom, we entered the ancient city of Thark, from whose long-forgotten people this horde of green men have stolen even their name. The hordes of Thark number some 30,000 souls and are divided into 25 communities. Each community has its own Jed and lesser chieftains, but all are under the rule of Tal Hajas, Jedak of Thark. 5 communities make their headquarters at the city of Thark, and the balance are scattered among other deserted cities of ancient Mars throughout the district claimed by Tal Hajas. We made our entry into the great central plaza early in the afternoon. There were no enthusiastic friendly greetings for the returned expedition. Those who chanced to be in sight spoke the names of warriors or women with whom they came in direct contact, in the formal greeting of their kind, but when it was discovered that they brought 2 captives, a greater interest was aroused, and Dejah Thoris and I were the centers of inquiring groups. We were soon assigned to new quarters, and the balance of the day was devoted to settling ourselves to the changed conditions. My home now was upon an avenue leading into the plaza from the south, the main artery down which we had marched from the gates of the city. I was at the far end of the square and had an entire building to myself. The same grandeur of architecture which was so noticeable a characteristic of Korad was in evidence here, only, if that were possible, on a larger and richer scale. My quarters would have been suitable for housing the greatest of earthly emperors, but to these queer creatures nothing about a building appealed to them but its size and the enormity of its chambers. The larger the building, the more desirable. And so Tal Hajas occupied what must have been an enormous public building, the largest in the city, but entirely unfitted for residence purposes. The next largest was reserved for Lord Quaspotamal, the next for the Jed of a lesser rank, and so on to the bottom of the list of 5 Jeds. Of the 5 Jeds. Of the list of 5 Jeds. The warriors occupied the buildings with the chieftains to whose retinue they belonged, or, if they preferred, sought shelter among any of the thousands of untenanted buildings in their own quarter of town, each community being assigned a certain section of the city. The selection of building had to be made in accordance with these divisions, except insofar as the Jeds were concerned, they all occupying edifices which fronted upon the plaza. As far as the Jeds were concerned, they all occupying... Okay, whatever. When I had finally put my house in order, or rather seen that it had been done, it was nearing sunset, and I hastened out with the intention of locating Sola and her charges. As I had determined upon having speech with Deja Thoris and trying to impress on her the necessity of our at least patching up a truce until I could find some way of aiding her to escape. I searched in vain until the upper rim of the great red sun was just disappearing behind the horizon. Then I spied the ugly head of Ula peering from a second-story window on the opposite side of the very street where I was quartered, but near the plaza. Without waiting for a further invitation, I bolted up the winding runway which led to the second floor, and entering a great chamber at the front of the building, man, you should jump to the window, was greeted by the frenzied Ula, who threw his great carcass upon me. It's not his carcass, it's his body. He ain't dead. Nearly hurtling me to the floor. The poor old fellow was so glad to see me that I thought he would devour me. His head split from ear to ear, showing his 3 rows of tusks in his hobgoblin smile. Quieting him with a word of command and a caress, I looked hurriedly through the approaching gloom for a sign of Deja Thoris, and then, not seeing her, I called her name. There was an answering murmur from the far corner of the apartment, and with a couple of quick strides I was standing beside her where she crouched among the furs and silks upon an ancient carved wooden seat. As I waited, she rose to her full height and looked me straight in the eyes, said, "What would Dotar Sojat Thark of Deja Thoris, his captive?" What would Dotar Sojat? That's his, those are his secondary names from killing the other chieftains. What did Dotar Sojat Thark of Deja Thoris, his captive? I mean, my brain's saying there are missing words there, but basically she's saying, what do you want with me, in a very formal fashion. Deja Thoris, I do not know how I have angered you. It was furthest from my desire to hurt or offend you, whom I had hoped to protect and comfort. Have none of me if it is your will, but that you must aid me in effecting your escape, if such a thing be possible, is not my request, but my command. When you are safe once more at your father's court, you may do with me as you please, but from now on until that day I am your master, and you must obey and aid me. She looked at me long and earnestly, and I thought that she was softening toward me. I understand your words, Dotar Sojat, she replied, but you I do not understand. You are a queer mixture of child and man, of brute and noble. I only wish that I might read your heart. Look down at your feet, Deja Thoris. It lies there now where it has lain since that other night at Korad, and where it will ever lie beating alone for you until death stills it forever. She took a little step toward me, her beautiful hands outstretched in a strange, groping gesture. What do you mean, John Carter? She whispered. What are you saying to me? I am saying what I had promised myself that I would not say to you, at least until you are no longer a captive among the green men. What, from your attitude toward me for the past 20 days, I had thought never to say to you. I am saying, Deja Thoris, that I am yours, body and soul, to serve you, to fight for you, and to die for you. Only one thing I ask of you in return, and that is that you make no sign, either of condemnation or of approbation, of my words until you are safe among your own people, and that whatever sentiments you harbor toward me, they be not influenced or colored by gratitude. Whatever I may do to serve you will be prompted solely from selfish motives, since it gives me more pleasure to serve you than not. Fuck, bro, just tell you her lover. Jesus Christ. I will respect your wishes, John Carter. Oh, she used his Original names, yes. Because I understand the motives which prompt them, and I accept your service no more willingly than I bow to your authority. Your word shall be my law. I have twice wronged you in my thoughts, and again I ask your forgiveness. They waited 20 days to have this conversation. More relationship advice from Sid. Talk to your fucking, significant others. Like, for real. Further conversation of a personal nature was prevented by the entrance of Sola, who was much agitated and wholly unlike her usual calm and possessed self. That horrible Sarkoja has been before Tal Hajas, she cried, and from what I heard upon the plaza, there is little hope for either of you. What do they say? Inquired Deja Thoris. That you will be thrown to the wild calots, dogs, in the great arena as soon as the hordes have assembled for the yearly games. Sola, I said, you are a Thark, but you hate and loathe the customs of your people as much as we do. Will you not accompany us in one supreme effort to escape? Why would you wait until you're at the heart of the enemy's society, not just a base, before you then decide that you're going to escape? I am sure that Deja Thoris can offer you a home and protection among her people, and your fate can be no worse among them than it must ever be here. Honor? Yeah, I hate honor. Another bit of advice. Honor is another phrase for honor is artificial social debt. Think about it. Yes, cried Deja Thoris. Come with us, Sola. You will be better off among the red men of Helium than you are here, and I can promise you not only a home with us, but the love and affection your nature craves, and which must always be denied you by the customs of your own race. Come with us, Sola. We might go without you, but your fate would be terrible if they thought you had connived to aid us. I know that even the fear would not tempt you to interfere in our escape, but we want you with us. We want you to come to a land of sunshine and happiness amongst the people who know the meaning of love, of sympathy, and of gratitude. Say that you will, Sola. Tell me that you will. Was this, and not wanting the other guys to be dishonored? Same problem. Yes, let John have both a green and red wife. Yeah. Oh, dear. The great waterway which leads to Helium is but 50 miles to the south, murmured Sola, half to herself. A swift thought might make it in 3 hours, and then to Helium it is 500 miles. Most of the way through thinly settled districts. They would know, and they would follow us. But we might hide among the great trees for a time, and the chances are small indeed for escape. They would follow us to the very gates of Helium, and they would take toll of life at every step. You do not know them. Is there no other way we might reach Helium? I asked. Can you not draw me a rough map of the country we must traverse, Deja Thoris? Yes, she replied, and taking a great diamond from her hair, she drew upon the marble floor the first map of Barsumium territory I had ever seen. It was crisscrossed in every direction with long, straight lines, sometimes running parallel and sometimes converging towards some great circle. The lines, she said, were waterways, the circles cities, and one far to the northwest of us she pointed out as Helium. There were other cities closer, but she said she feared to enter many of them as they were not all friendly toward Helium. It looks like there's a picture every so often in this book, and it looks like they took the worst exposed photograph of a black and white scene in a movie ever taken ever. Finally, after studying the map carefully in the moonlight which now flooded the room, I pointed out a waterway far to the north of us which also seemed to lead to Helium. Does this not pierce your grandfather's territory? I asked. Yes, she answered, but it is 200 miles north of us. It is one of the waterways we crossed on the trip to Thark. They would never suspect that we would try for that distant waterway, I answered, and that is why I think that it is the best route for our escape. Sola agreed with me, and it was decided that we should leave Thark this same night, just as quickly, in fact, as I could find and saddle my thoats. Sola was to ride one, and Deja Thoris and I the other, each of us carrying sufficient food and drink to last us for 2 days, since the animals could not be urged too rapidly for so long a distance. Maybe it'd take more. Oh crap! It's like ad time again. Jesus! All right, we're gonna hop into 3 minutes of ads. Get up, stretch, have a drink, and we'll be back. I'm back. Imagine having a green and red wife. Alright, let's see. Right, they're taking 2 days of food each, since the animals could not be urged too rapidly for so long a distance. But still, that's 200 miles away, so they're still going to traverse 100 miles in a single day. Like, that's a lot of miles. So, assuming you have 8 hours of travel in a day, let's just say 10. Right, well, this gets easier. So it's like 20 miles an hour? 20 miles an hour. Is that fast? It's like 30-ish kilometers an hour, right? I don't think animals travel that speed for 8 solid hours a day. 10 hours a day even. Anyways, Martian creatures perhaps, built different. I directed Sola to proceed with Deja Thoris along one of the less frequented avenues to the southern boundary of the city, where I would overtake them with the thoats as quickly as possible. Then, leaving them to gather what food, silks, and furs we were to need, I slipped quietly to the rear of the first floor and entered the courtyard where our animals were moving restlessly about, as was their habit, before settling down for the night. In the shadows of the buildings and out beneath the radiance of the Martian moons moved a great herd of thoats and zitidars, the latter grunting their low gutturals and the former occasionally emitting a sharp squeal which denotes the almost habitual state of rage in which these creatures passed their existence. They were quieter now, owing to the absence of man. But as they scented me, they became more restless, and their hideous noise increased. It was risky business, this entering a paddock of thoats alone and at night. First, because their increasing noisiness might warn the nearby warriors that something was amiss, and also because, for the slightest cause, or for no cause at all, some great bull thoat might take it upon himself to lead a charge upon me. Having no desire to awaken their nasty tempers upon such a night as this, where so much depended upon secrecy and dispatch, I hugged the shadows of the buildings, ready at an instant's warning to leap into the safety of a nearby door or window. Thus I moved silently to the great gates which opened upon the street at the back of the court, and as I neared the exit, I called softly to my 2 animals. How I thanked the kind Providence which had given me the foresight to win the love and confidence of these wild, dumb brutes. For presently, from the far side of the court, I saw 2 huge bulks forcing their way toward me through the surging mountains of flesh. They came quite close to me, rubbing their muzzles against my body and nosing for the bits of food it was always my practice to reward them with. Opening the gates, I ordered the 2 great beasts to pass out, and then slipping quietly after them, I closed the portals behind me. I did not saddle or mount the animals there, but instead walked quietly in the shadows of the buildings toward an unfrequented avenue which led toward the point I had arranged to meet Deja Thoris and Sola. With the noiselessness of disembodied spirits, we moved stealthily along the deserted streets, but not until we were within sight of the plain beyond the city did I commence to breathe freely. I was sure that Sola and Deja Thoris would find no difficulty in reaching our rendezvous undetected, but with my great thoughts I was not so sure for myself. Sorry, I hiccup. As it was quite unusual for warriors to leave the city after dark. In fact, there was no place for them to go within any but a long ride. I reached the appointed meeting place safely, but as Deja, Thoris, and Sola were not there, I led my animals into the entrance hall of one of the large buildings, presuming that one of the other women of the same household may have come to speak to Sola, and so delayed their departure. I did not feel any undue apprehension until nearly an hour had passed without a sign of them. And by the time another half hour had crawled away, I was becoming filled with grave anxiety. Then there broke upon the stillness of the night the sound of an approaching party, which, from the noise, I knew could be no fugitives creeping stealthily toward liberty. Soon the party was near me, and from the black shadows of my entranceway I perceived a score of mounted warriors, who, in passing, dropped a dozen words that fetched my heart clean into the top of my head. He would likely have arranged to meet them just without the city, and so... I heard no more. They had passed on, but it was enough. Our plan had been discovered, and the chances for escape from now on to the fearful end would be small indeed. My one hope now was to return undetected to the quarters of Deja Thoris and learn what fate had overtaken her, but how to do it with these great monstrous thoughts upon my hands. Now that the city was probably aroused by the knowledge of my escape was a problem of no mean proportions. Well, you know what they say. If the heroes tell you what the plan is, it's going to fail. Suddenly an idea occurred to me, and acting on my knowledge of the construction of the buildings of these ancient Martian cities, with a hollow court within the center of each square, I groped my way blindly through the dark chambers, calling the great thoughts after me. They had difficulty in negotiating some of the doorways, but as the buildings fronting the city's principal exposures were all designed upon a magnificent scale, they were able to wriggle through without sticking fast, and thus we finally made the inner court, where I found, as I expected, the usual carpet of moss-like vegetation which would provide their food and drink until I could return them to their own enclosure. That they would be as quiet and contented here as elsewhere, I was confident. Nor was there but the remotest possibility that they would be discovered, as the green men had no great desire to enter these outlying buildings, which were frequented by the only thing, I believe, which caused them the sensation of fear, the great white apes of Barsoom. Right, you might have come across apes. Removing the saddle trappings, I hid them just within the rear doorway of the building through which we had entered the court, and, turning the beasts loose, quickly made my way across the court to the rear of the buildings upon the further side, and thence to the avenue beyond. Waiting in the doorway of the building until I was assured that no one was approaching, I hurried across to the opposite side and through the first doorway to the court beyond. Thus, crossing through court after court, with only the slight chance of detection which the necessary crossing of the avenues entailed, I made my way in safety to the courtyard in the rear of Deja Thoris's quarters. Here, of course, I found the beasts of the warriors who quartered in the adjacent buildings, and the warriors themselves I might expect to meet within if I entered, but fortunately for me, I had another and safer method of reaching the upper story where Deja Thoris should be found, and, after first determining as nearly as possible which of the buildings she occupied, for I had never observed them before from the court side, I took advantage of my relatively great strength and agility and sprang upward until I grasped the sill of the second-story window which I thought to be in the rear of her apartment. Drawing myself inside the room, I moved stealthily toward the front of the building, and not until I had quite reached the doorway of her room was I made aware of voices that it was occupied. I did not rush headlong in, but listened without to assure myself that it was Dejah Thoris and that it was safe to venture within. It was well indeed that I took this precaution, for the conversation I heard was in the low gutturals of men, and the words which finally came to me proved a most timely warning. The speaker was a chieftain, and he was giving orders to 4 of his warriors. And when he returns to this chamber, he was saying, as he surely will when he finds she does not meet him at the city's edge, you 4 are to spring upon him and disarm him. It will require the combined strength of all of you to do it if the reports they bring back from Korad are correct. When you have him fast, bear him to the vaults beneath the Jedak's quarters and chain him securely where he may be found when Tal Hajjas wishes him. Allow him to speak with none, nor permit any other to enter this apartment before he comes. There will be no danger of the girl returning, for by this time she is safe in the arms of Tal Hajjas. And may all her ancestors have pity upon her, for Tal Hajjas will have none. The great Sarkoja has done a noble knight's work. I go, and if you fail to capture him when he comes, I commend your carcasses to the cold bosom of Is. It's like, don't fail me or you will die. Kind of a brutal command there. Chapter 17. A Costly Recapture. As the speaker ceased, he turned to leave the apartment by the door where I was standing, but I needed to wait no longer. I had heard enough to fill my soul with dread, and stealing quietly away, I returned to the courtyard by the way I had come. My plan of action was formed upon the instant, and crossing the square and the bordering avenue upon the opposite side, I soon stood within the courtyard of Tal Hajjas. The brilliantly lighted apartments of the first floor told me where first to seek, and advancing to the windows, I peered within. I soon discovered that my approach was not to be the easy thing I had hoped, for the rear rooms bordering on the court were filled with warriors and women. I glanced up at the stories above, discovering that the third was apparently unlighted, and so decided to make my entrance to the building from that point. It was the work of but a moment for me to reach the windows above, and soon I had drawn myself within the sheltering shadows of the unlighted third floor. Fortunately, the room I had selected was untenanted, and creeping noiselessly to the corridor beyond, I discovered a light in the apartments ahead of me. Reaching what appeared to be a doorway, I discovered that it was but an opening upon an immense inner chamber which towered from the first floor, 2 stories below me, to the dome-like roof of the building, high above my head. The floor of this great circular hall was thronged with chieftains, warriors, and women, and at one end was a great raised platform upon which squatted the most hideous beast I had ever put my eyes upon. He had all the cold, hard, cruel, terrible features of the Green Warriors, but accentuated and debased by the animal passions to which he had given himself over for many years. There was not a mark of dignity or pride upon his bestial countenance, while his enormous bulk spread itself out upon the platform where he squatted like some huge devilfish, his 6 limbs accentuating the similarity in a horrible and startling manner. But the sight that froze me with apprehension was that of Dejah Thoris and Sola standing there before him, and the fiendish leer of him as he let his great protruding eyes gloat upon the lines of her beautiful figure. She was speaking, but I could not hear what she said, nor could I make out the low grumbling of his reply. She stood there, erect before him, her head high held, and even at the distance I was from them, I could read the scorn and disgust upon her face, as she let her haughty glance rest without sign of fear upon him. She was indeed the proud daughter of 1,000 Jedaks, every inch of her dear, precious little body, so small, so fragile beside the towering warriors around her, but in her majesty dwarfing them into insignificance. She was the mightiest figure among them, and I verily believed that they felt it. Presently, Tal Hajas made a sign that the chamber be cleared, and that the prisoners be left alone before him. Slowly, the chieftains, the warriors, and the women melted away into the shadows of the surrounding chambers, and Deja, Thoris, and Sola stood alone before the Jeddak of the Tharks. One chieftain alone had hesitated before departing. I saw him standing in the shadows of a mighty column, his fingers nervously toying with the hilt of his greatsword, and his cruel eyes bent in implacable hatred upon Tal Hajas. It was Tars Tarkas, and I could read his thoughts as they were an open book for the undisguised loathing upon his face. He was thinking of that other woman who, 40 years ago, had stood before this beast, and could I have spoken a word into his ear at that moment, the reign of Tal Hajas would have been over. But finally, he also strode from the room, not knowing that he left his own daughter at the mercy of the creature he most loathed. Tal Hajas arose, and I, half fearing, half anticipating his intentions, hurried to the winding runway which led to the floors below. No one was near to intercept me, and I reached the main floor of the chamber unobserved, taking my station in the shadow of the same column that Tars Tarkas had but just deserted. As I reached the floor, Tal Hajas was speaking. "Princess of Helium, I might wring a mighty ransom from your people would I but return you to them unharmed, but 1,000 times rather would I watch that beautiful face writhe in the agony of torture. It shall be long drawn out, that I promise you. 10 days of pleasure were all too short to show the love I harbor for your race. The terrors of your death shall haunt the slumbers of the red men through all the ages to come. They will shudder in the shadows of the night as their fathers tell them of the awful vengeance of the green men, of the power and might and hate and cruelty of Tal Hajas. But before the torture, you shall be mine for 1 short hour, and word of that too shall go forth to Tardos Mors, Jeddak of Helium, your grandfather, that he may grovel upon the ground in the agony of his sorrow. Tomorrow the torture will commence. Tonight, thou art Tal Hajas. Come." He sprang down from the platform and grasped her roughly by the arm, but scarcely had he touched her that I leaped between them. My short sword, sharp and gleaming, was in my right hand. I could have plunged it into his putrid heart before he realized that I was upon him, but as I raised my arm to strike, I thought of Tars Tarkas, and with all my rage, with all my hatred, I could not rob him of that sweet moment for which he had lived and hoped all these long, weary years. And so, instead, I swung my good right fist full upon the point of his jaw. Without a sound, he slipped to the floor as one dead. In the same deathly silence, I grasped Deja Thoris by the hand, and motioning Sola to follow, we sped noiselessly from the chamber and to the floor above. Unseen, we reached a rear window, and with the straps and leather of my trappings, I lowered first Sola and then Deja Thoris to the ground below. Dropping lightly after them, I threw them rapidly around the court. In the shadows, I drew. Like that radically different action. I drew them rapidly around the court in the shadows of the buildings, and thus we returned over the same course I had so recently followed from the distant boundary of the city. We finally came upon my thoats in the courtyard where I had left them, and placing the trappings upon them, we hastened through the building to the avenue beyond. Mounting, Sola upon one beast, and Deja Thoris behind me upon the other, we rode from the city of Thark through the hills to the south. Instead of circling back around the city to the northwest and toward the nearest waterway, which lay so short a distance from us, we turned to the northeast and struck out upon the mossy waste across which, for 200 dangerous and weary miles lay another main artery heading to Helium. No word was spoken until we had left the city far behind, but I could hear the quiet sobbing of Deja Thors as she clung to me with her dear head resting against my shoulder. If we make it, my chieftain, the debt of Helium will be a mighty one, greater than she can ever pay you. And should we not make it, she continued, the debt is no less, though Helium will never know, for you have saved the last of our line from worse than death. I did not answer, but instead reached to my side and pressed the little fingers of her I loved where they clung to me for support, and then, in unbroken silence, we sped over the yellow, moonlit moss, each of us occupied with his own thoughts. For my part, I could not be other than joyful had I tried with Deja Thoris's warm body pressed close to mine, and with all our unpassed danger, my heart was singing as gaily as though we were already entering the gates of Helium. And it occurs to me that, like, the honor thing is sort of, it's been checked, right? That box has been ticked. Taltarkas or what? Dad. I forget his name, but I have too many Tals and Tarks in my brain. Yep. Yeah. It was already in like the king's custody, right? And so it's now the king's fault that they escaped. Yeah, they delivered him to the city. Our earlier plans had been so sadly upset that we now found ourselves without food or drink, and I alone was armed. We therefore urged our beasts to a speed that must tell on them sorely before we could hope to sight the ending of the first stage of our journey. We rode all night and all the following day with only a few short rests. On the second night, both we and our animals were completely fagged. Let's say fatigued instead, shall we? And so we lay down upon the moss and slept for some 5 or 6 hours, taking up the journey once more before daylight. All the following day we rode, and when, late in the afternoon, we had sighted no distant trees, the mark of the great waterways throughout all Barsoom, the terrible truth flashed upon us. We were lost. Evidently we had circled, but which way it was difficult to say, nor did it seem possible with the sun to guide us by day and the moons and stars by night. At any rate, no waterway was in sight, and the entire party was almost ready to drop from hunger, thirst, and fatigue. Far ahead of us, and a trifle to the right, we could distinguish the outlines of low mountains. These we decided to attempt to reach in the hope that from some ridge we might discern the missing waterway. Night fell upon us before we reached our goal, and almost fainting from weariness and weakness, we lay down and slept. I was awakened early in the morning by some huge body pressing close to mine, and opening my eyes with a start, I beheld my blessed old Woola snuggling close to me. The faithful brute had followed us across that trackless waste to share our fate, whatever it may be. Putting my arms about his neck, I pressed my cheek close to his, nor am I ashamed that I did it, nor of the tears that came to my eyes as I thought of his love for me. Shortly after this, Deja, Thoris, and Sola awakened, and it was decided that we push on at once in an effort to gain the hills. And hey, emergency food dish just showed up, yeah? Yeah, exactly. We had gone scarcely a mile when I noticed that my throat was commencing to stumble and stagger in a most pitiful manner. Although we had not attempted to force them out of a walk since about noon of the preceding day, suddenly he lurched wildly to one side and pitched violently to the ground. Deja, Thoris, and I were thrown clear of him and fell upon the soft moss with scarcely a jar, but the poor beast was in a pitiable condition, not even being able to rise, although relieved of our weight. Sorry, yeah, those extra pause there was, yeah. He can't stand up even though they weren't sitting on him. Sola told me that the coolness of the night, when it fell, together with the rest, would doubtless revive him, and so I decided not to kill him, as was my first intention, as I had thought it cruel to leave him alone there to die of hunger and thirst. Relieving him of his trappings, which I flung down beside me, we left the poor fellow to his fate, and pushed on with the one thoat as best we could. Sola and I walked, making Deja Thoris ride, much against her will. In this way we had progressed to within about a mile of the hills we were endeavoring to reach, when Deja Thoris, from her point of vantage upon the thoat, cried out that she saw a great party of mounted men filing down from a pass in the hills several miles away. Sola and I both looked in the direction she indicated, and there, plainly discernible, were several hundred mounted warriors. They seemed to be headed in a southwesterly direction, which would take them away from us. They doubtless were Thark warriors who had been sent out to capture us, and we breathed a great sigh of relief that they were traveling in the opposite direction. Quickly lifting Deja Thoris from the thoat, I commanded the animal to lie down, and we three did the same, presenting as small an object as possible for fear of attracting the attention of the warriors toward us. We could see them as they filed out of the pass, just for an instant before they were lost to view behind a friendly ridge. To us, a most providential ridge, since had they been in view for any great length of time, they scarcely could have failed to discover us. As what proved to be the last warrior came into view from the pass, he halted, and to our consternation drew his small but powerful field glass to his eye and scanned the sea bottom in all directions. Evidently he was a chieftain, for in certain marching formations among the green men, a chieftain brings up the extreme rear of the column. As his glass swung toward, our hearts stopped in our breasts, and I could feel a cold sweat start from every pore in my body. Presently it swung full upon us and stopped. The tension on our nerves was near the breaking point, and I doubt if any of us breathed for the few moments he held us covered by his glass. Then he lowered it, and we could see him shout a command to the warriors who had passed from our sight behind the ridge. He did not wait for them to join, however. Instead, he wheeled his thoat and came tearing madly in our direction. There was but one slight chance, and that we must take it quickly. Raising my strange Martian rifle to my shoulder, I sighted and touched the button which controlled the trigger. There was a sharp explosion as the missile reached its goal, and the charging chieftain pitched backward from his flying mount. Springing to my feet, I urged the thoat to rise, and directed Sola to take Deja Thoris with her upon him and make a mighty effort to reach the hills before the green warriors were upon us. I knew that in the ravines and gullies they might find a temporary hiding place, and even though they died there of hunger and thirst, it would be better so that they fell into the hand. Better that with so much better. No. Let's reset the lips. Die there of hunger and thirst. It would be better so than that they fell into the hands of the Tharks. So then, my brain didn't like that. Forcing my two revolvers upon them as a slight means of protection, and, as a last resort, as an escape for themselves from the horrid death which recapture would surely mean. I lifted Deja Thoris in my arms and placed her upon the thoat behind Sola, who had already mounted at my command. "Goodbye, my princess," I whispered. "We may meet in Helium yet. I have escaped from worse plights than this." I tried to smile as I lied. "What?" she cried. "You're not coming with us?" "How may I, Deja Thoris? Someone must hold these fellows off for a while, and I can better escape them alone than could the three of us together." She sprang quickly from the thoat, and throwing her dear arms about my neck, turned to Sola, saying with quiet dignity, "Fly, Sola. Deja Thoris remains to die with the man she loves." Those words are engraved upon my heart. Gladly would I give up my life 1,000 times could I only hear them once again. But I could not then give even a second to the rapture of her sweet embrace, and pressing my lips to hers for the first time, I picked her up bodily and tossed her to her seat behind Sola again, commanding the latter in peremptory tones to hold her there by force, and then, slapping the throat upon the flank, I saw them borne away, Dejah Thoris struggling to the last to free herself from Sola's grasp. Turning, I beheld the green warriors mounting the ridge, and, looking for their chieftain, in a moment they saw him, and then me, but scarcely had they discovered me than I commenced firing. Lying flat upon my belly in the moss, I had an even 100 rounds in the magazine of my rifle. That's a lot of rounds. And another 100 in the belt at my back. And I kept up a continuous stream of fire until I saw all of the warriors who had been first to return from behind the ridge either dead or scurrying to cover. My respite was short-lived, however, for soon the entire party, numbering some 1,000 men, that's a bit more than 200 rounds, came charging into view, racing madly toward me. I fired until my rifle was empty, and they were almost upon me, and then a glance showing me that Dejah Thoris and Sola had disappeared among the hills, I sprang up, throwing down my useless gun, and started away in the direction opposite to that taken by Sola and her charge. If ever Martians had an exhibition of jumping, it was granted those astonished warriors on that day, long years ago. But while it led them away from Dejah Thoris, it did not distract their attention from endeavoring to capture me. Ooh, sorry. I hiccuped a lot. They raced wildly after me until finally my foot struck a projecting piece of quartz, and down I went, sprawling upon the moss. As I looked up, they were upon me, and although I drew my longsword in an attempt to sell my life as dearly as possible, it was soon over. I reeled beneath their blows, which fell upon me in perfect torrents. My head swam. All was black, and I went down beneath them to oblivion. Chapter 18, Chained in Warhoon. Oh, right. These are, Warhoon was the nest that they destroyed. So they're probably really angry. It must have been several hours before I regained consciousness. You know what just occurred to me? You think they would have a better tactic than to charge across an open field against someone with one of their own weapons. They know what their weapons can do. It must have been several hours before I regained consciousness, and I well remember the feeling of surprise which swept over me as I realized that I was not dead. I was lying among a pile of sleeping silks and furs in the corner of a small room in which were several green warriors, and bending over me was an ancient and ugly female. Unnecessary comment. That was how war was done on Earth at that time too. It's true, I guess. You'd think they would be smarter about it. As I opened my eyes, she turned to one of the warriors, saying, "He will live, O Jed." "'Tis well," replied the one so addressed, rising and approaching my couch. "He should render rare sport for the great games." And now, as my eyes fell upon him, I saw that he was no Thark, for his ornaments and metal were not of that horde. He was a huge fellow, terribly scarred about the face and chest, with one broken tusk and a missing ear. Strapped on either breast were human skulls, and depending from these, a number of dried human hands. Lovely fellow. His reference to the great games of which I had heard so much while among the Tharks convinced me that I had but jumped from purgatory to Gehenna. Gehenna or Gehenna? I think Gehenna's right, yeah. After a few more words with the female, during which she assured him that I was now fully fit to travel, the Jed ordered that we mount and ride after the main column. I was strapped securely to as wild and unmanageable a thoat as I had ever seen, and, with a mounted warrior on either side to prevent the beast from bolting, we rode forth at a furious pace in pursuit of the column. My wounds gave me but little pain, so wonderfully and rapidly had the application and injections of the female exercised their therapeutic powers, and so deftly had she bound and plastered the injuries. Just before dark, we reached the main body of troops, shortly after they had made camp for the night. I was immediately taken before the leader, who proved to be the Jadak of the hordes of Warhoon. Like the Jed who had brought me, he was frightfully scarred, and also decorated with the breastplate of human skulls and dried dead hands which seemed to mark all the greater warriors among the Warhoons, as well as to indicate their awful ferocity which greatly transcends even that of the Tharks. The Jadak, Bar Comas, who was comparatively young, was the object of the fierce and jealous hatred of his old lieutenant, Dakkova, the Jed who had captured me, and I could not but note the almost studied efforts which the latter made to affront his superior. He entirely omitted the usual formal salutation as we entered the presence of the Jadak, and sorry, excuse me as I tried to pronounce things with my lips. And as he pushed me roughly before the ruler, he exclaimed in a loud and menacing voice, "I have brought a strange creature wearing the metal of a Thark, whom it is my pleasure to have battle with a wild thoat at the great games. He will die as Bar Comas, your Jadak, sees fit, if at all," replied the young ruler with emphasis and dignity. "If at all?" roared Dakkova. By the dead hands at my throat, but he shall die, Bar Comas. No maudlin weakness on your part shall save him. Oh, would that Warhoon were ruled by a real Jadak rather than by a water-hearted weakling from whom even old Dakkova could tear the metal with his bare hands." Bar Comas eyed the defiant and insubordinate chieftain for an instant, his expression one of haughty, fearless contempt and hate. And then, without drawing a weapon, and without uttering a word, he hurled himself at the throat of his defamer. I never before had seen two green Martian warriors battle with nature's weapons, and the exhibition of animal ferocity which ensued was as fearful a thing as the most disordered imagination could picture. They tore at each other's eyes and ears with their hands, and with their gleaming tusks repeatedly slashed and gored until both were cut fairly to ribbons from head to foot. Bar Comas had much the better of the battle, as he was stronger, quicker, and more intelligent. It soon seemed that the encounter was done, saving only the final death thrust when Bar Comas slipped in breaking away from a clinch. It was the one little opening that Dakkova needed, and hurling himself at the body of his adversary, he opened the full length of his body, the great tusk finally wedging in the bones of Bar Comas' jaw. Victor and vanquished rolled limp and lifeless upon the moss, a huge mass of torn and bloody flesh. Bar Comas was stone dead, and only the most Herculean efforts on the part of Dakkovas's female saved him from the fate he deserved. 3 days later, he walked without assistance to the body of Bar Comas, which, by custom, had not been moved from where it fell, and placing his foot upon the neck of his erstwhile ruler, he assumed the title of Jadak of Warhoon. The dead Jadak's hands and head were removed to be added to the ornaments of his conqueror, and then his women cremated what remained amid wild and terrible laughter. The injuries to Dakkova had delayed the march so greatly that it was decided to give up the expedition. which was a raid upon a small Thark community in retaliation for the destruction of the incubator, until after the Great Games the entire body of warriors, 10,000 in number, turned back toward Warhoon. My introduction to these cruel and bloodthirsty people was but an index to the scenes I witnessed almost daily while with them. They are a smaller horde than the Tharks, but much more ferocious. Not a day passed but that some members of the various Warhoon communities met in deadly combat. I have seen as high as 8 mortal duels within a single day. Then how are they alive? 10,000 is not that many. Right? He killed nearly 100, right, who are racing across the field to capture him. 8 of them die per day. That's like, what's that? 2,400 dead a year just from random fights, and they only birth 100 a year. There shouldn't be 10,000. There should be 0 of them. They should be dead, right? They should be extinct. Oh, where was I? We reached the city of Warhoon after some 3 days' march, and I was immediately cast into a dungeon and heavily chained to the floor and walls. Food was brought me at intervals, but owing to the utter darkness of the place, I do not know whether I lay there days or weeks or months. It was the most horrible experience of all my life, and that my mind did not give way to the terrors of that inky blackness has been a wonder to me ever since. The place was filled with creeping, crawling things. Cold, sinuous bodies passed over me when I lay down, and in the darkness I occasionally caught glimpses of gleaming, fiery eyes, fixed in horrible intentness upon me. No sound reached me from the world above, and no word would my jailer vouchsafe when my food was brought to me, although I, at first, bombarded him with questions. Finally, all the hatred and maniacal loathing for these awful creatures who had placed me in this horrible place was centered by my tottering reason upon this single emissary who represented to me the entire horde of Warhoons. I had noticed that he always advanced with his dim torch to where he could place the food within my reach, and as he stooped to place it upon the floor, his head was about on a level with my breast. So, with the cunning of a madman, I backed into the far corner of my cell. When next I heard him approaching, and gathering a little slack of the great chain which held me in my hand, I waited his coming, crouching like some beast of prey. As he stooped to place my food upon the ground, I swung the chain above my head and crashed the links with all my strength upon his skull. Without a sound, he slipped to the floor, stone dead. Laughing and chattering like the idiot I was fast becoming, I fell upon his prostrate form, my fingers feeling for his dead throat. Presently, they came into contact with a small chain at the end of which dangled a number of keys. The touch of my fingers in these keys brought back my reason with the suddenness of thought. No longer was I a gibbering idiot, but a sane, reasoning man with the means of escape within my very hands. As I was groping to remove the chain from my victim's neck, I glanced up into the darkness to see 6 pairs of gleaming eyes fixed, unwinking upon me. Slowly they approached, and slowly I shrank back from the awful horror of them. Back into my corner, I crouched, holding my hands, palms out, before me, and stealthily on came the awful eyes, until they reached the dead body at my feet. Then slowly they retreated, but this time with a strange grating sound, and finally they disappeared in some black and distant recess of my dungeon. Creepy. A grating sound. Then slowly they retreated, but this time with a strange grating sound. And finally they disappeared in some black, distant recess of my dungeon. What were they doing? That tells me nothing. I am distraught. Chapter 19. Battling in the Arena. Slowly I regained my composure and finally essayed again to attempt to remove the keys from the dead body of my former jailer. But as I reached out into the darkness to locate it, I found to my horror that it was gone. Then the truth flashed on me. The owners of those gleaming eyes had dragged my prize away from me to be devoured in their neighboring lair, as they had been waiting for days, for weeks, for months, through all this awful eternity of my imprisonment, to drag my dead carcass to their feast. For 2 days, no food was brought to me. But then a new messenger appeared, and my incarceration went on as before. But not again did I allow my reason to be submerged by the horror of my position. Shortly after this episode, another prisoner was brought in and chained near me. By the dim torchlight, I saw that he was a red Martian, and I could scarcely await the departure of his guards to address him. As their retreating footsteps died away in the distance, I called out softly to the Martian a word of greeting, Kaor. "Who are you who speaks out of the darkness?" he answered. "John Carter, a friend of the Red Men of Helium." "I am of Helium," he said, "but I do not recall your name." Then I told him my story as I have written it here, omitting only any reference to my love for Dejah Thoris. He was much excited by the news of Helium's princess and seemed quite positive that she and Sola could easily have reached a point of safety from where they left me. He said that he knew the place well because the defile through which the Warhoon warriors had passed when they discovered us was the only one ever used by them when marching to the south. Dejah Thoris and Sola entered the hills not 5 miles from a great waterway and are now probably quite safe, he assured me. Well, that's good. That makes the reader happy, I think. My fellow prisoner was Kantos Kan, a padwar, or lieutenant, in the navy of Helium. He had been a member of the ill-fated expedition which had fallen into the hands of the Tharks at the time of Dejah Thoris's capture, and he briefly related the events which followed the defeat of the battleships. Badly injured and only partially manned, they had limped slowly toward Helium, but while passing near the city of Zodanga, the capital of Helium's hereditary enemies among the Red Men of Barsoom, they had been attacked by a great body of war vessels, and all but the craft to which Kantos Kan belonged were either destroyed or captured. His vessel was chased for days by 3 of the Zodagan warships, but finally escaped during the darkness of the moonless night. 30 days after the capture. Wait, you can't have a moonless night on Mars. One of the moons crosses the night sky like, 7 times a night or something? There ain't no moonlessness. 30 days after the capture of Dejah Thoris, or about the time of our coming to Thark, his vessel had reached Helium with about 10 survivors of the original crew of 700 officers and men. Immediately, 7 great fleets, each of 100 mighty warships, had been dispatched to search for Dejah Thoris. And from these vessels, 2,000 smaller craft have been kept out continuously in futile search for the missing princess. 2 green Martian communities have been wiped off the face of Barsoom by the avenging fleets, but no trace of Dejah Thoris had been found. Nope, I lost it. It was a futile search for the missing princess. 2 green Martians wiped off the face. They've been found. They had been searching among the northern hordes, and only within the past few days had they extended their quest to the south. Kantos Kan had been detailed to one of the small one-man flyers and had had the misfortune to be discovered by the Warhoons while exploring their city. The bravery and daring of the man won my greatest respect and admiration. Alone he had landed at the city's boundary and on foot penetrated to the buildings surrounding the plaza. For 2 days and nights he had explored their quarters and their dungeons in search of his beloved princess, only to fall into the hands of a war party of warhoons as he was about to leave. After assuring himself that Deja Thoris was not a captive there. During the period of our incarceration, Kantos Kan and I became well acquainted and formed a warm personal friendship. A few days only elapsed, however, before we were dragged forth from our dungeon for the great games. We were conducted early one morning to an enormous amphitheater which, instead of having been built upon the surface of the ground, was excavated below the surface. It had partially filled with debris so that how large it had originally been was difficult to say. In its present condition, it held the entire 20,000 warhoons of the assembled hordes. Oh, one good meteor strike then. The arena was immense, but extremely uneven and unkept. Around it, the warhoons had piled building stone from some of the ruined edifices of the ancient city to prevent the animals and the captives from escaping into the audience. And at each end had been constructed cages to hold them until their turns came to meet some horrible death upon the arena. Kantos Kan and I were confined together in one of the cages. In the others were wild Kalots, Thoats, mad Zitadars, green warriors, and women of other hordes, and many strange and ferocious wild beasts of Barsoom which I had never seen before. The din of their roaring, growling, and squealing was deafening, and the formidable appearance of any one of them was enough to make the stoutest heart feel grave forebodings. Kantos Kan explained to me that at the end of the day, one of these prisoners would gain freedom, and the others would lie dead about the arena. The winners in the various contests of the day would be pitted against each other until only 2 remained alive, the victor in the last encounter being set free, whether animal or man. The following morning, the cages would be filled with a new consignment of victims, and so on throughout the 10 days of the games. Shortly after we had been caged, the amphitheater began to fill, and within an hour, every available part of the seating space was occupied. Doc Kova, with his jeds and chieftains, sat at the center of one side of the arena, upon a large raised platform. At a signal from Doc Kova, the doors of 2 cages were thrown open, and a dozen green Martian females were driven to the center of the arena. Each was given a dagger, and then, at the far end, a pack of 12 Kalots or wild dogs were loosed upon them. As the brutes, growling and foaming, rushed upon the almost defenseless women, I turned my head that I might not see the horrid sight. The yells and laughter of the green horde bore witness to the excellent quality of the sport, and when I turned back to the arena, as Kantos Kan told me it was over, I saw 3 victorious Kalots snarling and growling over the bodies of their prey. The women had given a good account of themselves. Next, a mad Zitadar was loosed among the remaining dogs, and so it went throughout the long, hot, horrible day. During the day, I was pitted against first men and then beasts, but as I was armed with a long sword and always outclassed my adversary, I'm gonna hate that word for my life, for my entire life, I suppose. Outclassed my adversary in agility and generally in strength as well. It proved but child's play to me. Time and time again, I won the applause of the bloodthirsty multitude, and toward the end, there were cries that I be taken from the arena and be made a member of the hordes of Warhoon. Finally, there were but 3 of us left. A great green warrior of some far northern horde, Kantos Kan, and myself. The other 2 were to battle, and then I to fight the conqueror for the liberty which was accorded the final winner. Kanto's Kan had fought several times during the day and, like myself, had always proven victorious, but occasionally by the smallest of margins, especially when pitted against the Green Warriors. I had little hope that he could best his giant adversary, who now moved down all before him during the day. Who had mowed down all before him during the day. The fellow towered nearly 16 feet in height, while Kanto's Kan was some inches under 6 feet. As they advanced to meet one another, I saw for the first time a trick of Martian swordsmanship which centered Kanto's Kan's every hope of victory and life on one cast of the dice. For as he came to within about 20 feet of the huge fellow, he threw his sword arm far behind him over his shoulder, and with a mighty sweep hurled his weapon point foremost at the Green Warrior. It flew true as an arrow and pierced the poor devil's heart, laid him dead upon the arena. Kanto's Kan and I were now pitted against each other, but as we approached to the encounter, I whispered to him to prolong the battle until nearly dark, and in the hope that we might find some means of escape. The horde evidently guessed that we had no hearts to fight each other, and so they howled in rage as neither of us placed a fatal thrust. Just as I saw the sudden coming of dark, I whispered to Kanto's Kan to thrust his sword between my left arm and my body. As he did so, I staggered back, clasping the sword tightly with my arm, and thus fell to the ground, with his weapon apparently protruding from my chest. Kanto's Kan perceived my coup, and stepping quickly to my side, he placed his foot upon my neck, and withdrawing his sword from my body, gave me the final death blow through the neck, which is supposed to sever the jugular vein. But in this instance, the cold blade slipped harmlessly into the sand of the arena. In the darkness which had now fallen, none could tell that he had really finished me. This book uses some reverse logic in my brain. Like, to me, be like, none could tell that he hadn't really finished me. This is still not wrong. They couldn't tell that they had finished him, right? They couldn't confirm it, but still, it's backwards. I whispered to him to go and claim his freedom, and then look for me in the hills east of the city, and so he left me. When the amphitheater had cleared, I crept stealthily to the top, and as the great excavation lay far from the plaza and in an untenanted portion of the great dead city, I had little trouble in reaching the hills beyond. All right, that's the end of that chapter, and we have ads coming up, so we're going to take a little break. Yeah, we have ads, so we're going to run ads. I'm getting a little bit of a headache, and I'm getting tired, so we might do a couple more chapters and then call it, I think. Yeah, we'll probably have one more stream after this, looking at the scroll bar, so that should probably be good. All right, see you in a few minutes. This whole night, I just realized I haven't had my fan going. I've been a little on the warm side, I think. All right. Chapter 20, in the Atmosphere Factory. That's interesting. For 2 days I waited there for Kanto's Kan, but as he did not come, I started off on foot in a northwesterly direction, toward a point where he had told me lay the nearest waterway. My only food consisted of vegetable milk from the plants which gave so bounteously of this priceless fluid. But you have to have access to the plants, right, bro? Where did that come from? My only food consisted of a vegetable milk from the plants which gave so bounteously. Yeah, like what is 8 gallons a day or something? I think it was. It was a ton of fluid, somehow. Through 2 long weeks I wandered, stumbling through the nights, guided only by the stars and hiding during the days behind some protruding rock or among the occasional hills I traversed. Several times I was attacked by wild beasts, strange uncouth monstrosities that leaped upon me in the dark, so that I had ever to grasp my longsword in my hand that I might be ready for them. Usually my strange, newly acquired telepathic power warned me in ample time, but once I was down with vicious fangs at my jugular and a hairy face pressed close to mine before I knew that I was even threatened. But often, was that like... Usually my strange, newly acquired telepathic power warned me in ample time, but once I was down... but once he got surprised, I guess, okay. What manner of thing was upon me, I did not know, but that was a large and heavy and many-legged I could feel. Did not know, but that it was large and heavy and many-legged that I could feel. My hands were at his throat before the fangs had a chance to bury themselves in my neck, and slowly I forced the hairy face from me and closed my fingers vice-like upon his windpipe. Without sound we lay there, the beast exerting every effort to reach me with those awful fangs, and I straining to maintain my grip and choke the life from it as I kept it from my throat. Slowly, my arms gave to the unequal struggle, and inch by inch the burning eyes and gleaming tusks of my antagonist crept toward me, until, as the hairy face touched mine again, I realized that all was over. And then, a living mass of destruction sprang from the surrounding darkness, I bet you it's this dog, full upon the creature that held me pinioned to the ground. The two rolled growling upon the moss, tearing and rending one another in a frightful manner, but it was soon over, and my preserver stood lowered head over the throat of the dead thing, which would have killed me. Yeah, totes the pupper. This is the second time it saved him, right? Because earlier on he mentioned that Woola saved him 2 times. The nearer moon, hurtling suddenly above the horizon and lighting up the Barsoomian scene, showed me that my preserver was Woola. Called it. But from whence he had come, or how he found me, I was at a loss to know. That I was glad of his companionship, it is needless to say, but my pleasure at seeing him was tempered by anxiety as to the reason of his leaving Deja Thoris. Only her death, I felt sure, could account for his absence from her. So faithful I knew him to be to my commands. By the light of the now brilliant moons, I saw that he was but a shadow of his former self, and as he turned from my caress and commenced greedily to devour the dead carcass at my feet, I realized that the poor fellow was more than half starved. Why? Apparently he can kill things and eat them just fine. Yeah, or that she was safe now? Yeah. Exactly. I myself was in but little better plight, but could not bring myself to eat the uncooked flesh, and I had no means of making a fire. When Woola had finished his meal, I again took up my weary and seemingly endless wandering in quest of the elusive waterway. At daybreak of the 15th day of my search, I was overjoyed to see the high trees that denoted the object of my search. About noon, I dragged myself wearily to the portals of a huge building which covered perhaps 4 square miles and towered 200 feet in the air. It showed no aperture in the mighty walls other than the tiny door at which I sank exhausted. Nor was there any sign of life about it. And it had a big bling, so my apologies. It is... I'm going to blame RAR. Well, that was like an hour ago. Well, who knows? It'd be these other things. Either way, let's put our phone into Do Not Disturb for the short time we have left tonight, I think. Yes. Yes. Where was I? Nor was there any life sign about the doorway. Okay. I could find no bell or other method of making my presence known to the inmates of the palace. and thus a small round hole in the wall near the door was for that purpose. It was of about the bigness of a lead pencil, and thinking that it might be in the nature of a speaking tube, I put my mouth to it, and was about to call into it when a voice issued from it asking me whom I might be, where from, and the nature of my errand. I explained that I had escaped from the Warhoons and was dying of starvation and exhaustion. You wear the metal of a green warrior and are followed by a cullet, yet you are of the figure of a red man. In color you are neither green nor red. In the name of the ninth ray, what manner of creature are you? I am a friend of the red men of Barsoom, and I am starving. In the name of humanity, open to us, I replied. Presently, the door commenced to recede before me until it had sunk into the wall 50 feet. That's a hell of a sink. Then it stopped and slid easily to the left, exposing a short, narrow corridor of concrete, at the further end of which was another door, similar in every respect to the one I had just passed. No one was in sight, yet immediately we passed the first door, it slid gently into place behind us and receded rapidly to its original position in the front wall of the building. As the door had slipped aside, I had noted its great thickness, fully 20 feet, as it had reached its place once more after closing behind us. Great cylinders of steel had dropped from the ceiling behind it and fitted their lower ends into apertures countersunk in the floor. You ain't breaking through that door, Jesus. A second and third door receded before me and slipped to one side as the first, before I reached a large inner chamber where I found food and drink set out upon a great stone table. A voice directed me to satisfy my hunger and to feed my cullet, and while I was thus engaged, my invisible host put me through a severe and searching cross-examination. Your statements are most remarkable, said the voice, on concluding its questioning, but you are evidently speaking the truth. It is equally evident that you are not of Barsoom. I can tell that by the conformation of your brain and the strange location of your internal organs and the shape and size of your heart. Can you see through me? I exclaimed. Yes, I can see all but your thoughts, and where you are Barsoomium, I can read those. Then a door opened at the far side of the chamber, and a strange, dried-up little mummy of a man came toward me. He wore but a single article of clothing or adornment, a small collar of gold from which depended upon his chest a great ornament as large as a dinner plate, set solid with huge diamonds, except for the exact center, which was occupied by a strange stone, an inch in diameter that scintillated 9 different and distinct rays, the 7 colors of our earthly prism, and 2 beautiful rays which to me were new and nameless. I cannot describe them any more than you could describe red to a blind man. That's an excuse, and that's totally from Eldritch Horror. I know that they were beautiful in the extreme. The old man sat and talked with me for hours, and the strangest part of our intercourse was that I could read his every thought, while he could not fathom an iota from mine unless I spoke. It's a very shiny disc, yes. I did not apprise him of my ability to sense his mental operations, and thus I learned a great deal which proved of immense value to me later, and which I would never have known had he suspected my strange power. For the Martians have such perfect control of their mental machinery that they are able to direct their thoughts with absolute precision. The building in which I found myself contained the machinery which produces the artificial atmosphere which sustains life on Mars. The secret of the entire process hinges on the use of the 9th ray, one of the beautiful scintillations which I had noted emanating from the great stone in my host's diadem. I always want to say scintillations. I don't think that's right. This ray is separated from the other rays of the sun by means of finely adjusted instruments placed upon the roof of the huge building. 3/4 of which is used for reservoirs in which the ninth ray is stored. It's storing the light. Okay. This product is then treated electrically, because electricity was very mysterious back then, I'm sure. Or rather, certain proportions of refined electric vibrations are incorporated with it. Electric vibrations. And the result is then pumped to the 5 principal air centers of the planet, where as it is released, contact with the ether of space transforms it into atmosphere. All right. Is anyone else familiar with the theory of ether? It was a serious scientific hypothesis that kind of was used to explain air, like air or yeah, something. I forget the whole lot of it. Obviously, it was disproven, but it was a sincere, serious scientific hypothesis. That's where ether came from. There is always sufficient reserve of the ninth ray stored in the great building to maintain the present Martian atmosphere for 1,000 years. And the only fear, as my new friend told me, was that some accident might befall the pumping apparatus. He led me to an inner chamber where I beheld a battery of 20 radium pumps, any one of which was equal to the task of furnishing all Mars with the atmosphere compound. For 800 years, he told me, he had watched these pumps, which are used alternately a day each at a stretch, or a little over 24½ Earth hours. He has one assistant who divides the watch with him, half a Martian year, about 344 of our days. Each of these men spend alone in this huge, isolated plant. Every red Martian is taught during earliest childhood the principles of the manufacture of atmosphere, but only two at one time ever hold the secret of ingress into the great building, which, built as it is with walls 150 feet thick, is absolutely unassailable. Even the roof being guarded from assault by aircraft by a glass covering 5 feet thick. The only fear they entertain of attack is from green Martians or some demented red men. Red man, as all Barsoomians realize that the very existence of every form of life of Mars is dependent upon the uninterrupted working of this plant. One curious fact I discovered as I watched his thoughts was that the outer doors are manipulated by telepathic means. The locks are so finely adjusted that the doors are released by this action of a certain combination of thought waves. To experiment with my newfound toy, I thought to surprise him into revealing this combination, and so I asked him, in a casual manner, how he had managed to unlock the massive doors for me from the inner chambers of the building. As quick as a flash, there leaped to his mind 9 Martian sounds, but as quickly faded as he answered that this was a secret that he must not divulge. Hello, Gwen. How you doing? Are you here for this? Do you wonder where your balls are? They're all gone. Where could they be? Possibly they were thrown around all day long for you while I was working. Yep. She's bored now. It's a secret to a clean stream, I guess. Ah, yes, a secret he must not divulge. From then on, his manner toward me changed, as though he feared that he had been surprised into divulging his great secret. I read suspicion and fear in his looks and thoughts, though his words were still fair. Before I retired for the night, he promised to give me a letter to a nearby agricultural officer who would help me on my way to Zudanga, which he said was the nearest Martian city. But be sure that you do not let them know you are bound for Helium, as they are at war with that country. My assistant and I are of no country. We belong to all Barsoom, and this talisman which we wear protects us in all lands, even among the green men. Though we do not trust ourselves to their hands if we can avoid it, he added. And so, good night, my friend, he continued. May you have a long and restful sleep. Yes, a long sleep. and though he smiled pleasantly, I saw in his thoughts the wish that he had never admitted me. And then a picture of him standing over me in the night, and the swift thrust of a long dagger, and the half-formed words, "I am sorry, but it is for the best good of Barsoom." As he closed the door of my chamber behind him, his thoughts were cut off from me, as was the sight of him, which seemed strange to me in my little knowledge of thought transference. What was I to do? How could I escape through these mighty walls? Easily could I kill him now that I was warned, but once he was dead, I could no more escape. And with the stopping of the machinery of the great plant, I should die with all the other inhabitants of the planet. All, even Deja Thoris, were she not already dead. For the others did not give the snap of my finger. For the others, I did not give the snap of my finger, but the thought of Deja Thoris drove from my mind all desire to kill my mistaken host. I cautiously opened the door of my apartment and, followed by Woola, sought the inner of the great doors. A wild scheme had come to me. I would attempt to force the great locks by the 9 thought waves I had read in my host's mind. Creeping stealthily through corridor after corridor, and down winding runways which turned hither and thither, I finally reached the great hall in which I had broken my long fast that morning. Nowhere had I seen my host, nor did I know where he kept himself by night. I was on the point of stepping boldly out into the room when a slight noise behind me warned me back into the shadows of a recess in the corridor. Dragging Woola after me, I crouched low in the darkness. Presently, the old man passed close by me, and as he entered the dimly lighted chamber which I had been about to pass through, I saw that he held a long, thin dagger in his hand, and that he was sharpening it upon a stone. In his mind was the decision to inspect the radium pumps, which would take about 30 minutes, and then return to my bedchamber and finish me. As he passed through the great hall and disappeared down the runway which led to the pump room, I stole stealthily from my hiding place and crossed to the great door, the inner of the 3 which stood between me and liberty. Concentrating my mind upon the massive lock, I hurled the 9 thought waves against it. In breathless expectancy I waited, when finally the great door moved softly toward me and slid quietly to one side. One after the other, the remaining mighty portals opened at my command, and Woola and I stepped forth into the darkness, free, but little better off than we had been before. Other than that we had full stomachs. Well, Woola's not hard up for food. You know, hang on. Isn't all the moss on the ground edible? Isn't that where they get their food from in the first place? The ground, don't they just all eat the same stuff? That must be wrong. No, they have like a cheese-like thing, but that's made from the frickin' moss, isn't it? Hastening away from the shadows of the formidable pile, I made for the first crossroad, intending to strike the central turnpike as quickly as possible. This I reached about morning, and entering the first enclosure I came to, I searched for some evidence of habitation. The beasts do, and there is water in the stems, yeah. Right, so maybe eat some of that. Like, or at least suck on it, right? It might be like people eating grass, but maybe you could suck the moisture out. I don't know. Like, where do they get, where does humanoid food come from? Right? And I guess there are multiple plants, because there's the water plants too, so there has to be some sort of variety. Some sort of ecology. There were low, rambling buildings of concrete, barred with heavy, impassable doors, and no amount of hammering or hallooing brought any response. Weary and exhausted from sleeplessness, I threw myself upon the ground, commanding Woola to stand guard. Some time later, I was awakened by his frightful growlings and opened my eyes to see 3 red Martians standing a short distance from us and covering me with their rifles. I am unarmed and no enemy, I hastened to explain. I have been a prisoner among the green men and am on my way to Zodanga. All I ask is food and rest for myself and my kalat, and the proper directions for reaching my destination. They lowered their rifles and advanced pleasantly toward me, placing their right hands upon my left shoulder, after the manner of their custom of salute, and asking me many questions about myself and my wanderings. They then took me to the house of one of them, which was only a short distance away. The buildings I had been hammering at in the early morning were occupied only by stock and farm produce, the house proper standing among a grove of enormous trees, and, like all red Martian homes, had been raised at night some 40 or 50 feet from the ground in a large round metal shaft which slid up or down within a sleeve sunk in the ground. Of course it was, obviously, and was operated by a tiny radium engine in the entrance hall of the building. Instead of bothering with bolts and bars for their dwellings, the red Martians simply run them up out of harm's way during the night. They also have private means for lowering or raising them from the ground without if they wish to go away and leave them. These brothers, with their wives and children, occupied 3 similar houses on this farm. They did no work themselves, being government officers in charge. The labor was performed by convicts, prisoners of war, delinquent debtors, and confirmed bachelors who were too poor to pay the high celibate tax which all Martian governments impose. Damn, a tax to not have a family? Interesting. Like, it's the opposite of the green Martians, isn't it? Like, they want to have... Well, no. Yeah, the Martians have very controlled population, but the red men, like, are they having problems having enough babies, like, to sustain their population? Would be the opposite of that problem. They were the personification of cordiality and hospitality. Cordiality. Yeah, whatever. And I spent several days with them, resting and recuperating from my long and arduous experiences. When they had heard my story, I omitted all reference to Deja Thoris and the old man of the atmosphere plant. They advised me to color my body to more nearly resemble their own race, and then attempted to find employment in Zodanga, either in the army or the navy. The chances are small that your tale will be believed until after you have proven your trustworthiness and won friends among the higher nobles of the court. This you can most easily do through military service, as we are a warlike people on Barsoom, explained one of them, and save our richest favors for the fighting man. When I was ready to depart, they furnished me with a small domestic bull-thoat, such as is used for saddle purposes by all red Martians. This is a very generous people. The animal is about the size of a horse and quite gentle, but in color and shape an exact replica of this huge and fierce cousin of the wilds. The brothers had supplied me with a reddish oil with which anointed my entire body, and one of them cut my hair, which had grown quite long in the prevailing fashion of the time, square at the back and banged in the front, so that I could have passed anywhere upon Barsoom as a full-fledged red Martian. My metal and ornaments were also renewed in the style of a Zodangan gentleman, attached to the house of Pator, which was the family name of my benefactors. They filled a little sack at my side with Zodangan money. The medium of exchange upon Mars is not dissimilar from our own, except that the coins are oval. Paper money is issued by individuals as they are required and redeemed twice yearly. If a man issues more than he can redeem, the government pays his creditors in full, and the debtor works out the amount upon the farms or in mines, which are all owned by the government. This suits Everybody, except the debtor, as it has been a difficult thing to obtain sufficient voluntary labor to work the great isolated farmlands of Mars, stretching as they do like narrow ribbons from pole to pole. The wild stretches through wild stretches peopled by wild animals and wilder men. When I mentioned my inability to repay them for their kindness to me, they assured me that I would have ample opportunity if I lived long upon Barsoom, and bidding me farewell, they watched me until I was out of sight upon the broad white turnpike. Okay, we're gonna stop there. John has turned into a red Martian and has started collecting debt. And this can only be fun. Yes. We are up to chapter 21, an air scout for Zodenga. Man, he's really doing all the things along his way to helium, huh? Oh well. It's good. It's all good. Yeah, for some reason, that bling I think was Discord eventually getting around to talking about Rara's stream going live. It's crazy. Just crazy. Who do we have tonight? Who is doing like a reading? Let's see. Was it Wilds is becoming a popular game again? Someone's playing Doki Doki Literature Club. That's literature related, right? Probably. Totes. Yeah, there is nobody. Since we're doing a VTuber guide, that's probably not the right category. You might try looking for a new person. It's kind of hard. Oh, who's this? That's nice music. Okay, maybe. Oh, let's see. We have got, yeah, I think we have one more stream left of A Princess of Mars. And then we're probably moving on to the next book. Interesting to know how far through the next Monday stream we'll be when we hit the end. I'm pretty sure we're going to hit the end of it though. So we probably have one more stream of this story here. And then yeah, we'll be done A Princess of Mars. I'm good if you are. Yeah, I think I'm going to call it here. So Thursday we play. Would I be interested in the other books? Oh, like the sequels to this? Maybe. I'm enjoying it. There are parts where I like it more, and other parts where I don't like it as much. It's kind of weird, and I think it's when the sentences try to do negatives, and kind of like. It's kind of like what I was talking about before, right? There are parts where it's like, they couldn't see that I was stabbed, they were unable to see that I was stabbed. Kind of what that phrase was, right? Rather than they just couldn't see they couldn't see that I wasn't stabbed. Yeah, it's just older sentence structures. That's all that is. Otherwise, it's fine. There are amusing words every now and then there are modern words that I still can't talk about because dumb person. Yeah, I guess because English sucks, and that is a common complaint, of course. Yeah, but yeah, we'll see where we are at the end of this. I don't want to read the sequels right away, but we might pepper them in going forward in the future. I can see doing that. But yeah. But yeah. I guess the guy, like, the author left, like, tons of time for sequels, right? 10 years. 10 years on Mars. And then he's also 10 years back on Earth, apparently, when he's quote-unquote writing the book, right? Writing his story. So it's got like 20 years of content to go through. Yeah. Okay, I have no idea. This is going to be a new person for us. I don't think I've ever rated this person. But they're a VTuber, and they're doing something about a young prince comes home. I think they're writing. Everyone's writing something. So, but that's fine. We'll go do that. See what we get from here. It looks like they're a PNGer. So there we are. Yes. See everybody on Thursday.